saw her when she was in one of the meetings. She really knows her stuff.
She's finally going to retire. She has a grandson.
Oh yeah, she's
ready to,
yeah.
She was supposed to retire in 2020.
This is her last week.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'll call her.
Yeah, she'll be missed for sure. Kenzie's instrumental. And she has. When I came on, it was eggs.
She can write that Grant's language like I don't know. She's like, oh yeah, just write it this way and then that way. I was there Thursday. Christy and so we're friends on Facebook. So she messaged me, were you there? I was like, yeah, I was there. And then I was so busy, and I tried to wave to her, but she was on a phone call.
Yeah.
It is funny. People are like, were you there? She's big on getting back to the office. I'm so glad to see some people.
It's definitely nice. I think, one of my favorite ways I've been trying to talk to TT. Just get him some pictures. What did you have to do?
Oh, I had to take it to Henry and Peter.
Yeah.
So they told me that the reason why they said that they will have a network up soon is that there was all kinds of security problems. There's always a security problem.
Yeah.
So the security issue with the way it was running before. I want to do it right, so redo the network. And I was like, well, that's great. But in the meantime, where do I print?
I know. It's like, sometimes we
If I need to print today, that sounds great, guys. Sit.
Especially for Kristen, because a lot of it she
She might have a printer.
She does, but she does, it doesn't collate, it doesn't do a lot of like.
Oh, okay.
So it just makes her work a little bit slower. So it makes her she has to work. And in 2023, you just decided that
Baseball's around the corner this Thursday. You gonna go over anything? I know, the Nationals are terrible.
as soon as he saw it, he's like, take me from me, we're gone.
That's so cool. So the whole family?
No, just us.
Is Jordan next? Is Jordan next?
I'm not sure.
He is. He was clocked at 105 miles an hour. I was like, oh my god.
Can you even do it? Yeah, I'm excited.
They got a good team again.
Jason's absolute favorite.
Baseball? Does he do any fantasy baseball?
No, this is research stuff. We have a good friend. We have two good friends, and they try to get him to do it, but it's I don't know if you do it, but it seems like it takes a lot of time.
I have two teams.
Okay.
And it is a lot of work,
Yeah.
but it's fun. And I like the guys. And we have good. The one has been running for. Yeah. How you doing? It's been.
Hey, how are you? Nice to see you again, man. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Nice to meet you. Yes. Tom Thanks
Thank you for being with us today.
I don't know the best eyesight. Is that Loudermilk? Yeah. On the other side of him, Morelli? Loudermilk, Morelli, Sewell,
Kilmer,
yep.
Torres, Muser. Oh, Muser's not usually on this committee, but
I just ran into him. He said he's going to be here half an hour later, so.
And then I actually put the bios in here if you want to look at any.
Oh, sure.
Everyone's ready? The Committee on House Administration will come to order. I note that a quorum is present, and without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. Without objection, the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any materials they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli and members of the committee, for participating in today's hearing on the 2022 midterm election in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. So what exactly happened? Let's look back. In 2022, our nation faced a major supply chain crisis, including the paper needed to make ballots. The Committee on House Administration Republicans, the Election Assistance Commission, and several media outlets warned a ballot paper shortage could disrupt the 2022 election. In fact, committee Republicans held a widely attended and covered roundtable on the ballot paper shortage crisis in early 2022. The Elections Assistance Commission encouraged state and local election officials to prepare by ensuring they ordered enough ballots well in advance of the November election. I warned officials in my home state of Wisconsin about the need to prepare. In fact, in July 2022, I spoke with CBS 58, a CBS affiliate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and said, quote, one of the things is that paper ballots are a pretty unique type of paper. It's not just your average, everyday type of paper that you can snag off the shelf, which is good because it provides election integrity, but it's challenging for suppliers, end quote. Unfortunately, for voters in Luzerne County, their elections officials seem to be the only ones who didn't listen to the warnings. In Luzerne County, on Election Day 2022, nearly 1/3 of precincts ran out of paper. In some cases, there were shortages just after the polls opened. This resulted in voters being turned away from the polls and denied their right to vote. When some voters later returned to the polls, they discovered there were still no ballots. Effectively, many polls in Luzerne County were closed for hours on Election Day, and some didn't reopen. In response to the ballot shortage, election officials and voters rushed to stores such as Staples to buy standard copy paper for voters to use for voter-created emergency ballots, something that is truly unbelievable in American elections today. They were then instructed to write out choices on standard 20-pound paper, vote by photocopies of ballots instead of ballot paper, or cast emergency or provisional ballots in place of standard ballots. They had no guarantee that the voting equipment would be able to process these irregular ballots or that their vote would count. The Luzerne County Board of Elections has the authority and responsibility to investigate this election disaster. Yet 6 days after the election, on November 14th, the board voted to send the investigation to the district attorney, District Attorney Sam Sangudalce. 20 days after the election, on November 28th, the board met and voted not to certify the election because the problems were obvious. Then 2 days later, on November 30th, in a partisan vote following public pressure, 3 Democratic commissioners reversed course and voted to certify the election in spite of the obvious problems. And to date, no official action has been taken in Luzerne County. No report from the district attorney. No report from the Secretary of State. No report from the Luzerne County Board of Elections. There must be accountability. Our committee is focused on figuring out how this happened and ensuring it never happens again. This is all the more important as Pennsylvania prepares for a state election in May and a presidential election next year. In America, every interested and eligible citizen who wants to cast a ballot has the right to do so, and that vote must count in accordance with law. We invited several officials from Luzerne County to come today and answer some very straightforward questions about how this election disaster occurred. They're not here. We also need to learn how they intend to prevent this from happening in the future. It's disappointing they declined our invitation. I hope those officials who refused to come and testify today are watching to hear from voters in Luzerne County whose votes were suppressed due to their negligence. For years, several of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have claimed that states like Florida and Georgia that have implemented voter integrity laws are suppressing voters. In fact, for 2 years, I've sat through dozens of hearings on this topic. However, they never produced a single voter who wanted to vote and was unable to. But contrast that with today, as we hold a hearing with evidence that voters who wanted to legally vote were turned away from the polls. Today, we're working to bring transparency and accountability to the voters of Luzerne County who were failed by their local election officials. Citizens of Luzerne County deserve to be heard. They have the right to vote. They need answers from those who are elected to serve them. My goal is to provide transparency, to hold those accountable, and to prevent this disaster from ever happening again. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for 5 minutes for the purpose of providing an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Stile, for yielding me time. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us this morning. Today's hearing is more than a bit confusing for those of us on the minority side of the aisle. Some facts are very clear. There is no doubt there was a paper-related problem or shortage at multiple precincts in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania on Election Day, November 8, 2022. That is, without a question, a very, very bad thing. I understand the remedy decided upon by local officials was to afford voters the opportunity to vote by other means. Nonetheless, there should never be a case where election officials are caught napping and don't have enough paper. Such a situation is completely unacceptable, and we share our majority colleagues' alarm. This raises serious questions. Did someone forget to buy paper? Or did they buy the wrong kind of paper? Who bears the responsibility for ordering and purchasing paper? How many voters were affected by this? Were voters denied the right to vote? Did election workers offer each voter a backup method of voting? How many voters took advantage of the opportunity to use a backup method of voting? Some have suggested laws may have been broken, and to that point, the local district attorney, as my colleague, the chair, has suggested, the local district attorney has been investigating the incident and, according to press reports, hopes to be done with that investigation soon. The resulting report, we would expect, would answer these sorts of factual questions and would make some recommendations on who's to blame and whether or not criminal charges would be forthcoming as a result of breaking laws with criminal intent. Which brings us to the question that is sort of mystifying to us on this side of the aisle. What exactly are we trying to accomplish in today's hearing? There is no one here from Luzerne County government and no one here from the Pennsylvania Department of State, individuals who could actually shed some light and provide answers to some of these key questions. Our colleagues in the majority did invite folks from both offices, yet they declined, citing a reluctance to interfere with the ongoing district attorney's investigation. The reluctance seems logical, at least from our point of view. If you bring witnesses from a DA's investigation into a congressional hearing before the investigation is concluded, the witnesses might contradict their own testimony to the DA, contradict each other, or taint the future testimony of other witnesses. Not interfering with an ongoing investigation is a familiar enough concept, although we are spending a fair amount of time here in Washington talking about it lately. In any event, that leaves the question I asked earlier. What's the purpose of today's hearing? If it's to establish that something went wrong last November in Luzerne County, we completely agree. This much has already been established. Again, the minority has been fighting for the rights of every voter as long as I can remember, and this case is no different. The title of this hearing, Government Voter Suppression in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, more than implies a concerted, intentional effort, a conspiracy, if you will, to disenfranchise voters. Is the majority suggesting a conspiracy on the part of the Luzerne County Council to suppress voters? The County Council has 11 members, 10 of whom are Republicans. I'm also led to understand, and I'm no expert on Luzerne County politics, but it's not exactly a bastion of progressive politics. If it's to establish that suppression resulted in the outcome of the 2022 elections in Luzerne County being false or inaccurate, I would just say that as it relates to the House races, we did not receive any election contests, which is a formal complaint filed with the House of Representatives touching on Luzerne County this year. In fact, we did not receive any contests at all, which, as the majority has pointed out, highlights the successes of the 2022 midterm elections. We have heard a fair amount from our colleagues in the majority on the need for decentralized election administration. They argue for states' rights and limited federal intervention. I'm not sure this is the best example of such a principle, but in any event, I just wanted to touch on the limited nature of the exercise we're engaging in today, and to continue to raise questions that we have about why we're even here today, and why we're not waiting for the district attorney's report, why we're not waiting to make sure that we have a better understanding of the fact pattern from local officials and state officials as to what happened, how the paper shortage occurred, who's responsible, and who has the liability. I also note that the county manager, perhaps not related to this all, but resigned from office within days of the election. Now, whether or not that had anything to do with the paper shortage and who's responsible, I can't say. Just note that that manager was hired again by a county council that has 10 Republican members out of its 11-member board. But we want to know what's happening. We certainly do not want any voter to be disfranchised in the United States of America. That's a principle on which we have fought for decades, and we will continue to fight. And with that, thank you all again for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record hearing if they're submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Pursuant to paragraph C of Committee Rule 6, the witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative and may be seated. I will now introduce our first panel of witnesses. Our first witness, Mr. Bognet, ran as the Republican candidate in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District in the 2022 midterm election. Born and raised in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, Mr. Bognet previously held a senior appointment in the Trump administration where he worked on manufacturing and small business issues before resigning this position to run for Congress. Our next witness, Mr. Darren Gibbons, has been an attorney for the Republican National Committee since October 2021. Mr. Gibbons worked in Pennsylvania on Election Day for his 2021 and 2022 elections and was in Luzerne County throughout the recent difficulties in the 2022 election. Our next witness, Commissioner Don Palmer, was appointed by President Trump and confirmed by the United States Senate on January 2nd, 2019, to serve as the U.S. Election Assistance Commission Commissioner. During his tenure at the Election Assistance Commission, Commissioner Palmer has served as the designated federal officer of the EAC's Technical Guidance Development Committee, which is charged with developing the voluntary voting system guidelines, which set standards for voting machine testing and certification. Commissioner Palmer is a former secretary of the Virginia State Board of Elections and served as the Commonwealth's chief election official from 2011 to 2014. He also previously served as Florida's state election director. And finally, Alicia Hoffman-Mirilovich is the executive director of Action Together NEPA, a grassroots nonprofit advocacy organization that works to build community and increase civic engagement. Ms. Hoffman-Mirilovich is in her second term as the elected Pennsylvania Democratic State Committee member for Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. We appreciate our witnesses being here with us today, and we look forward to your testimony. As a reminder, we've read your written statements, and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you're limited to your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement unless I extend this time in consultation with Ranking Member Morelli. Please remember to press the button in your microphone in front of you so that it is on and all members can hear you. When you begin to speak, a light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes has expired, and we would ask you to please wrap up. I'll now recognize Mr. Bognet for 5 minutes for the purpose of making an opening statement.
Thank you to all members of the committee for having me today. My name is Jim Bognet. I live in Hazel Township, Pennsylvania in Luzerne County. I was the Republican nominee for Congress in 2022 in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. The general election, which took place in Luzerne County on November 8, 2022, was a complete disaster. The gross incompetence of the Election Bureau brought national shame on Luzerne County. The most common statement heard from voters and the press was, "How do you run out of paper at the polls?" Most importantly, many Luzerne County voters were disenfranchised through no fault of their own, and some voters still do not know if their votes were counted. The problems began early on election morning as we received calls saying that polling places across the county had run out of paper on which votes are recorded from the voting machines and fed by voters into the tabulators, which completes the submission of each vote. Voters were turned away from the polls and told to come back later, or asked to submit provisional or alternative ballots, which many voters refused to do. Some voters got out of line and left in disgust, and it's impossible to calculate how many left the polls. Others were asked to leave their phone numbers and told they would be called when the county workers provided more paper hours later. We heard from at least a dozen polling places that voters were being turned away and denied their right to vote. The paper shortage was widespread. The County Election Bureau had a giant whiteboard filled with the names of many precincts which ran out of paper or where other issues occurred, and this is that whiteboard. I believe it's been entered into evidence. By early afternoon, it was clear that many polling places across Luzerne County, the polls were closed on Election Day for hours at a time. Luzerne County took the extraordinary step of going to court and asking a judge to order that the voting period be extended from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. across the county due to the unprecedented closing of the polls. Our campaign agreed to support this because we wanted to make sure every lawful voter had a chance to vote. Stop for a minute and consider how extraordinary this is. On Election Day, with a governor, Senate, and 2 congressional races, as well as many local races occurring, Luzerne County had to walk into a judge's chamber and admit that polling places were effectively closed and had no paper to record votes on. In Luzerne County, the polls were closed on Election Day, disenfranchising voters. I spoke over the weekend with Eugene Doherty, an 84-year-old citizen of Hazel in Pennsylvania. He went to vote at 8:09 p.m. He was told that they'd be open till 10 p.m. The election worker had went home, closed the polls. She didn't have childcare. Him and his wife did not have a chance to vote. In the aftermath of the Election Day fiasco, Luzerne County tried to cover up the incredible mistakes that were made. Rather than take responsibility for what had happened, as the ranking member suggested, County Manager Randy Robertson announced that evening that he was resigning for quote-unquote personal reasons. He's never answered a question. Denise Williams, the head of the election board, allowed public comment at hearings, but flatly refused to answer any questions put to her. In fact, Ms. Williams admonished voters for directing questions toward the board and refused to provide any information about the paper shortage. At an open canvassing hearing the day after the election, the acting head of the Luzerne County Bureau of Elections, Beth McBride, an elected Democrat city councilwoman in Wilkes-Barre, refused to answer any questions from the press or public. No explanation was provided for the paper shortage. The Luzerne County administration has done everything in their power to deny responsibility and evade accountability for the disastrous election they administered. Many voters attended an election board meeting on November 14th to express their outrage. Citizens were not provided with any answers as to who was responsible for ordering the paper for the polling places. Election Bureau head Beth McBride was present and asked many times whose responsibility it was to order the ballot paper, but she refused to answer questions. We are left with one of 2 inescapable conclusions. Either Luzerne County election administrators forgot to order and provide paper to all polling locations, or Luzerne County election administrators purposely did not provide enough paper to over 40 polling locations. No one here present today can answer which of those 2 things happened, for only the election administrators, McBride and Williams, can provide these answers. Both of these officials have refused your committee's request to testify. Voters across Luzerne County have called me and expressed their outrage that 4.5 months later, election officials still won't answer questions. My goal in testifying today is to ask that all the facts be brought to light and responsible officials be compelled to testify in public under oath. And we make whatever changes are necessary to ensure this never happens again. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the conduct of elections in Luzerne County need to be cleaned up completely. Our right to vote is sacred. My grandparents served in World War II to fight for our freedom and right to vote. My grandfather was an Italian immigrant, came through Ellis Island. He told me he never missed an election in Luzerne County. We must restore faith in fair elections among voters of all parties. I believe this can only be done through your thorough congressional investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bognet. Mr. Darren Gibbons, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Darren Gibbons, and I've been an attorney for the Republican National Committee since October of 2021. During the 2022 midterm elections, I oversaw the RNC's legal election integrity efforts in Pennsylvania and other northeastern states. My role on Election Day was to monitor and manage the issues reported to our Pennsylvania Election Day headquarters. What happened in Luzerne is a national issue because of the impact poor election administration can have on voters' confidence. The main objective of the RNC's election integrity program is to protect and champion voter rights and build trust in the election process. Pennsylvania's Luzerne County faced a catastrophic breakdown on Election Day in 2022. County officials supplied polling places with an insufficient quantity of ballots to get through even the first hours of voting. This led to voters checking in and not receiving ballots, voters being turned away, and voters casting ballots on incorrect paper not recognized by tabulators. Poll workers and party observers scrambled to get answers from the county and the state to no avail. They simply could not and did not take adequate steps to resolve or mitigate these problems. Failures like those in Luzerne County not only have the direct effect of disenfranchising voters through no fault of their own, it also severely diminishes voters' confidence in our elections. I thank the committee for taking this matter seriously and examining how it occurred in order to prevent it from happening again, whether in Luzerne or anywhere else in our country. In hindsight, there were early warning signs that foreshadowed Luzerne was ill-prepared to competently administer this election. For example, it was reported that the county mailed 937 duplicate mail ballots in the weeks leading up to the election. The county also had a recent history of senior staff turnover. Even with these early warning signs, no one could have predicted a meltdown on this scale. On Election Day morning, the headquarters received reports of towns that were out of ballots. Reports of ballot shortages continued, and we noticed the polling locations reporting these issues were all coming from Luzerne. It was apparent that this was a county-wide issue. The RNC's headquarters received reports that a polling location turned away 50 voters because of ballot shortages. A location sent an individual to go purchase computer paper from a store to use for makeshift ballot paper, and locations' machines were not properly scanning ballots. Around 1 p.m., the solicitor filed an emergency petition to the Court of Common Pleas, which subsequently ordered a 2-hour poll extension and that voters voting during the extension cast provisional ballots as required by federal law. However, due to the ballot shortage, some precincts were already out of provisional ballots. Getting accurate information from the county throughout the day was difficult. On Wednesday morning, we dispatched a retained attorney to Luzerne County Board of Elections canvass to give public comment on how the party expected the county to ensure every legal vote was counted. The Luzerne County Board of Elections called a special meeting on November 14th, almost a week after the election, to allow for public comment. Disenfranchised voters and impacted poll workers commented that evening, and the board voted to refer the matter to the district attorney for investigation. A lawsuit by the Bognet for Congress campaign led to a court order for the county to produce a poll book reconciliation. By our analysis, there may have been more than 4,400 more votes signed into poll books than there were votes on tape. However, some of these sign-ins are accounted for by further analyzing the county's notes. It remains difficult to tell exactly how many votes may have not been counted in Luzerne, but it can be concluded that voters were disenfranchised. Although there are slightly less than 200,000 registered voters in Luzerne County, a systemic failure like this is a national issue. It is not just a failure by Luzerne County, but it is a failure by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and its Department of State. It is inevitable that things will go wrong on Election Day, but good election administration accounts for problems and ensures there are clear procedures for what poll workers are supposed to do when things go wrong. Pennsylvania has a reputation for inconsistent election administration practices throughout its counties, which can largely be attributed to a lack of leadership from the Pennsylvania Department of State. Despite warning signs such as the staff turnover, the mailing of duplicate ballots, and early reports of shortages on Election Day, the state left the county to fend for itself during the post-election aftermath. I thank you for having me here today. The RNC is focused on building voters' confidence in elections, and we are optimistic that together we can find solutions that prevent this from happening again. I look forward to answering your questions and continuing to engage with the committee as we work for fair and secure elections.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons. Mr. Donald Palmer, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear today to address the ongoing work of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, as part of your series on the 2022 midterms. Today, I'd like to discuss the role of the EAC's testing and certification program in protecting the integrity of voting equipment and materials recently used during the general election in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Our testing and certification program was successfully administered in the 2022 midterms and will continue to be instrumental as we help election officials prepare for the 2024 elections. Election integrity and cybersecurity of our election assistants play a vital role in our national security. Every lawfully cast vote counts, and I share your concern for these issues. To provide background into the issues faced by Luzerne County, I'd like to briefly describe the role of the Certification Division. Guided by the Help America Vote Act of 2002, or HAVA, this program continues to ensure the accessibility, security, and accuracy of voting equipment, strengthening the confidence of elections. Toward this goal, the Commission recently implemented the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines 2.0. This was achieved through the ongoing support of the Congress, the dedication of experts, election officials, and EAC staff. In 2023, the EAC is advancing our testing and certification efforts in several areas. More recently, the agency is working to launch an innovative field services program to help election officials strengthen their overall posture and preparedness. This endeavor will bring EAC staff on site to work with local officials on systems monitoring. Regarding the issues that occurred in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, the EAC certified configuration utilized by the county requires that the use of ballot paper that is specified by the manufacturer and tested within the EAC's program. The technical data package for this system, Dominion Democracy Suite 5.5 Alpha, details the paper manufacturer, type, weight, and color finish of that product. Although election officials must occasionally make difficult supply decisions, we encourage contingency planning to the maximum extent possible. This includes procurement of a sufficient supply of machine-appropriate paper and using provisional ballots when necessary. The apparent decision to use an alternative to the specified paper stock was necessitated by an unacceptable situation on the ground. While guidelines in election law pertaining to paper ballot ordering are determined at the state level, there are areas where we can provide guidance, particularly in the event of an emergency. In addition, states may use HAVA, election security grant funding, for procuring ballot stock and ballot stock with security features such as watermarks or unique ballot identifiers. It should also be noted that the EAC has closely monitored the paper stock issue and issued an alert in the summer of 2022 warning about the nationwide paper shortage. The EAC organized roundtable discussions on risk associated with the shortage and worked with the Election Infrastructure Subsector Coordinating Council to create additional guidance. The EAC is also launching a portal to connect election officials with nearby jurisdictions that use similar voting systems and may be able to share excess ballot stock in the event of a deficiency. To specifically address the VVSG 2.0 guidelines regarding paper used in voting systems, an update would be necessary to require detection mechanisms for ballot paper specifications. The EAC will work through the HAVA mandated process to consider these revisions. Occasionally in an election, a locality or precinct will run out of ballots for voters. It's an extremely unfortunate and avoidable situation. The ability to offer a ballot to a voter is fundamental to any free and fair election. Every election official I meet is dedicated to facilitating the right to vote for their citizens. In November 2024, the people of the United States will administer and take part in the nation's 60th presidential election. Our preparations are already well underway. Together, we must work together to improve elections at all levels of government and ensure that issues like those that occurred in Luzerne County do not happen again. Thank you for your continued support of the EAC and your unwavering commitment to election administrators, poll workers, and our nation's public servants. We look forward to working closely with you on these and other important matters. I would be pleased to address any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer. I now recognize Ms. Hoffman-Mirilovich for the purpose of making an opening statement.
Chairman Stile, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Alicia Hoffman-Miralovich, and I am a lifelong Pennsylvanian and have lived in Luzerne County for approximately 18 years. I'm a proud community leader and a mom. I serve as the Executive Director of Action Together NEPA. We are a nonprofit progressive advocacy organization with chapters across northeastern Pennsylvania, including one in Luzerne County. We advocate for protecting the freedom to vote and expanding access to the ballot box, and we work to engage and empower a community of voters. On Election Day in 2022, we learned that some polling locations were experiencing paper shortages. A court order was issued to extend polling times by 2 hours to allow voters additional time to vote. Our organization shifted all available resources to Luzerne County to make sure voters were aware of the extension. After Election Day, Action Together NEPA members and staff attended every session of the Board of Elections adjudication and certification process. We assisted in locating bipartisan volunteers to support in the transcription of emergency ballots. We held post-election updates and events highlighting the process that was still underway at the time and worked to ensure that voters understood the steps in the certification process. We do not yet know the cause of the paper shortage, as there is an ongoing investigation by District Attorney Sam Sanguadolch. We do know that elections in Luzerne County have been plagued by high turnover and loss of institutional memory for years. Some background on the structure of the Luzerne County government and its Elections Bureau may assist the committee in understanding this matter. Luzerne is a home rule county with a county council. Currently, 10 Republicans and 1 Democrat compose that council. The council hires the county manager, who is the head of our county administrative government, with the power to hire, terminate, and supervise personnel. The county manager oversees daily operations of county departments, including the Bureau of Elections. The Board of Elections is a commission composed of 5 citizen volunteers that works in coordination with the Bureau to establish policy, but does not directly manage elections administration. During multiple periods in the last 4 years, the county has lacked a permanent elections director for months at a time, including the ramp up to and execution of the 2022 general election. Earlier this year, a press analysis found that from 2016 to 2019, department staff had a median of 17 to 22 years of experience. That number fell to roughly 1 year of median experience in 2020 and 2021. Since December of 2019, the Bureau has had 5 different directors. Since August of 2020, the Bureau has had 5 different deputy directors. This chronic turnover does not foster the stability and institutional knowledge that is needed to seamlessly carry out elections. As an organization that cares deeply about any potential disenfranchisement or issues that could impact voting, we need government at every level to support and fully fund our elections. This includes providing sufficient funding to ensure adequate staffing levels, enough paper and supplies ordered in a timely fashion, and professional election administrators put in place to provide appropriate responses during and after Election Day. These are some measures that can increase faith in our elections, and we need our government to provide the proper funding and resources to make that happen. Action Together NEPA will be vigilant in our efforts to support an election system that reduces errors, responds when issues arise, and prioritizes the rights of voters. None of us ever want something like this to happen again, but we hope that the committee appreciates that the Luzerne County community came together, working to fix the problem, to help affected voters, and to count eligible votes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hoffman-Miralovich. During today's hearing, some recorded testimony will be provided via video screens in the hearing room and will be broadcast as part of the live coverage. The first video to be played is of WNEP reporter Chelsea Strub, who took to Facebook Live on Election Day to report on Luzerne County's ballot paper shortage issues. The video offers a good overview of the situation of Luzerne County in real time on Election Day 2022. While outside her home precinct in Harvey's Lake, Ms. Strub highlights in her video the problems that she and other voters in Luzerne County experienced due to the ballot paper issue on Election Day. Let's play the clip.
Well, I have a parliamentary inquiry before we begin.
The gentleman is recognized.
Is this a witness under oath?
No, pursuant to Rule 20, we're establishing procedures and taking such actions as may be necessary to carry out the responsibilities of the committee and to facilitate its effective operation.
So I'm not sure I understand this. Making the video available by unanimous consent, which is what we do with written materials, seems appropriate. Anybody who wants to watch the video at some point, I think, would be, able to do that. Playing it is akin, in my mind, to me reading all the submissions in writing that we typically submit for entry into the record. Is there a distinction here that's being made?
There is no distinction that's being made. Written records may be inserted into the record, and in this case, video will also be entered into the record.
Well, why don't we just have the link sent to everyone? They can watch it at their leisure, just the same way that you do with submitted written testimony.
And the decision of the chair, he has made the decision. I've made the decision to play. Does the gentleman have a further parliamentary inquiry? Otherwise, we will play the video.
Is this period of time, I don't know how long the video is that coming out of the 5 minutes by one of the members of the majority?
No.
So will we get the additional time that this, who's not a witness, apparently, because we can't cross-examine the witness, so this is just additional time being used. How do we equalize the time that's being used to watch a video that we can't ask the person in the video any questions? This is pretty, I've never seen this done before.
I would, well, I'll offer two things. The gentleman is welcome to go back and look at last Congress, the select committee that was created by the speaker on the select committee on January 6th did this often. So if he did not see those hearings, I'd suggest that the ranking member take the time to review those. I would also note that under Rule 20, the chair may establish such other procedures and take such actions as may be necessary to carry out the responsibilities of the committee. In the chair's discretion, I am playing this video unless there's a further parliamentary inquiry.
Well, I would just note that I believe the January 6th committee, which you're referring to, I think it was done by unanimous consent. There hasn't been a motion made on unanimous consent here. Obviously, I can't stop you, but I do want to express the minority's opposition to this, since we cannot ask anyone in the video any questions. They're not subject to being under oath when they give testimony. I'm not really sure what this is, but anyway,
the gentleman's objection is noted. I'm more than happy to take a vote as to whether or not this video should be played.
No, I just registered my opposition.
The opposition's recognized. Is there a parliamentary inquiry?
Absolutely. Was this video presented to the members of the minority in advance, as the statements are presented in advance of any meeting? Witnesses' names and bios are often part of the record and given in advance. Was this tape made available to the minority prior to today's meeing?
Minority committee staff was made aware videos would be played at today's hearing. There is no obligation from the majority to provide the videos in advance, nor to my knowledge was a request for the videos made. Unless there's a further parliamentary inquiry.
When was the minority staff notified that this video would be played today?
There's no obligation to provide advance notice. I provided advance notice to try to be as forthcoming and transparent as possible to the minority. There's no further parliamentary inquiry. We will.
I do. How is it that you are comparing a commission to a full committee? Are very different. You're comparing apples to oranges. This is not a commission that, committee, a commission hearing. This is a full committee hearing, and that yet you're presenting.
May I ask which commission the gentlewoman is referring to?
You mentioned the January 6th commission.
That was a committee. That was a select committee created by Speaker Pelosi. No further parliamentary inquiries being recognized. We'll roll the video.
Good afternoon, everybody. Newswatch 16's Chelsea Stroop here on this broken Powerball lunar eclipse full moon election day. Now, there are some issues with voting machines, voting processes in Luzerne County. And I just want to tell you what my experience was at the Harvey's Lake polling place. Also because everything I told you yesterday about how to vote in the machines has changed for some polling places right now. Now, yesterday I went through the voting process. It's a two-step process normally. You go to a giant iPad, you pick your selections, a piece of paper gets printed out from the machine below, you take it out, and then you put it in a tabulation machine, into a scanner. And that is how your vote is counted. The tabulation machine will say your ballot has been cast. And that's the process that we've known and what we've been told about for the last few years here in Luzerne County. Now, today at my polling place, I went to my polling place today at 10:30. It ran out of paper at 9:30. And the voters here in Harvey's Lake have been voting by provisional ballot. Now, there's a lot of questions about provisional ballots, and I'm trying to get answers from the Elections Bureau, but it rings and rings and rings, and the voicemail box is full. So as soon as I have an answer to some of these questions about provisional ballots, I will let you guys know. But what is happening here is we are voting by provisional ballots, so we are voting by hand and filling out bubbles. Now, there are some rules to these provisional ballots. You do not, repeat, you do not sign these provisional ballots. You do not put your name on provisional ballots. You do not put the date on provisional ballots. The only thing you are writing on these provisional ballots is you are filling in these bubbles. And then the people here at this polling place are having us put these provisional ballots, a single piece of paper, into a little slot in the back of the tabulation machine. And then the poll workers here tell me that they will be counted later tonight once that tabulation machine is delivered to the Elections Bureau. Now, we did have some snafus here that I witnessed while I was inside the polling place. So for a period of time, somebody came in who labeled themselves as an IT person for the Elections Bureau, was bringing in regular computer paper to use for these ballots. He said that it worked. When the paper was put into the ballot, went into the tabulation machine, it said it was counted. And so for a period of about 10 minutes, people were voting through regular computer paper in that process that I mentioned earlier. Then they got a call from the elections office saying, do not do that. And they went back to provisional ballots. This poll place sent somebody to Wilkes-Barre to get the proper stock paper for the voting machines. They went to the Elections Bureau, and I'm told they found out the Elections Bureau was also out of paper. So they had to go to Sam's Club to get the right kind of paper, and then we'll have to deliver it to this polling place, as well as a polling place in Lake Township, Dallas Township, and I'm also hearing reports of Dorrance Township. So please let us know if you are having these kinds of issues at your polling places and having to vote provisionally. As soon as I know what the counting process will be like for provisional ballots, I will let you know. Some people have told me here they're worried that provisional ballots will not be counted because they have to go through a second kind of review, because normally a provisional ballot is filled out by somebody who requested a mail-in ballot, did not vote by mail, and is coming to the polls to vote instead. Or if you voted by absentee ballot and did not vote by absentee ballot, you're supposed to surrender those ballots and vote here provisionally, so that way they can double check that this person only voted one time.
Oh, jeez.
So far, that's what's going on in Luzerne County right now. I have to go to Bucks County. My assignment today is to cover the Oz campaign tonight for Newswatch 16 and Fox 43 down in York, Pennsylvania. So anything that you guys send me about issues in Luzerne County, I'm going to pass along to my assignment desk and my managers and the reporters who are staying in the area tonight. But I just wanted to let you guys know please come out and vote. Please come out and vote. But you might have some issues when you get here to vote. You're going to vote provisionally, or you're going to wait for the proper paper. There was a period of time where I was given the option to vote with computer paper or provisional ballot, and I requested to wait to vote for the provisional ballot, and kind of caused some attitude, but I've tried to vote. I tried to do what was best, and I hope it goes smoothly for you guys. I hope that everything works itself out, and I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I can once I get a hold of somebody at the elections office. But like I said, right now their phone number just rings and rings and rings, and their voicemail box is full. So going to try to do what I can, and good luck to everybody.
Again, that was Ms. Strub with the local affiliate of the affiliate WNEP. I'll now begin our questions today, followed by the ranking member. We'll then alternate between the parties. I now recognize myself for the purpose of questioning our witnesses. Thank you all for taking your time and being here with us today. Mr. Bognet, you ran in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. What percentage of Luzerne County is roughly in the 8th Congressional District in Pennsylvania?
Luzerne County accounts for approximately 39% of the population in the district. Less people voted, less votes were recounted than percentage-wise we thought would be in Luzerne County.
So about 38% of the congressional districts in Luzerne County. What percentage of Luzerne County is in the 8th Congressional District? About 85%? Is that roughly accurate?
85%. The rest is in Mr. Muser's district.
Okay. And where were you on the ballot in the November 2020 election? You were running for the 8th Congressional District, correct?
That's right.
And when did you or your campaign become aware of precincts in Luzerne County did not have ballot paper on Election Day?
Very early in the morning. I hit about 16 precincts on Election Day going around greeting voters. We started to hear very early in the morning, I'd say in the 9 o'clock hour, we started to hear from voters calling me, texting my campaign saying they're turning us away, they don't have paper, they won't let us vote, what do we do? We're suspicious about doing it on provisional ballots because of all the problems, what should we do? That was the first that we heard about it.
So about 9 o'clock, somewhere in the 9 o'clock hour, you began to hear about it. Polls open in Pennsylvania at 7 a.m., is that correct?
That's correct.
So less than 3 hours into Election Day, problems began to arise. Are you aware of voters being turned away at the polls in Luzerne County on Election Day?
Yes. I mean, we heard multiple stories. We had a hotline set up. We had hundreds of calls to that hotline. We had affidavits submitted, people that were told to leave and leave their phone number, and they'd be called back later in the day to come back. Happened in some precincts.
So a whole series of problems. Many people were unable to vote. Did you or your campaign bring legal action?
We did. We brought a lawsuit in the post-election period to try to get a ballot reconciliation of the number of people who signed in to vote versus the number of votes that were counted.
So you brought forward a legal action. What was the Luzerne County Board of Elections response to your legal? Let me ask first, your legal action, was that to the Luzerne County Board of Elections?
Correct.
And what was the response of the Luzerne County Board of Elections to your legal action?
Well, of course they fought it. They showed up. Ms. McBride testified. That's the only time she's testified so far under oath about what happened. They fought it. They said everything's fine. A judge, kind of arbitrated and got them to agree that they would release within the next few days a precinct-by-precinct spreadsheet of who signed in to vote versus who voted. Of course, when they did that, there was something like a 4,000 to 5,000 disparity.
Has the county elections director provided an explanation on how the ballot paper shortage occurred or answered any of your questions regarding this fiasco?
She has refused to answer any questions at any public hearing, has never said on the record anything, and continues to refuse, didn't attend here today.
It's my understanding then that the Board of Elections referred this matter to the district attorney for investigation. Do you agree with the board's decision to refer this to the district attorney?
That was an extreme abdication of their duty. That was during the period where certification would occur afterwards. They refused to investigate what happened before certifying. There was incredible citizen outrage, hundreds of people attending meetings that usually 2 or 3 people come to. They wouldn't answer questions then, and they kind of used the DA's investigation as oh yeah, they'll take care of it, maybe next month we'll hear about it. They never answered a single question from a voter on how this fiasco occurred.
So since the Board of Elections handed this investigation off to the district attorney on November 14, 2022, has anything happened? Has there been a report? Has anyone been prosecuted?
There have been no reports. There have been no prosecutions. They've used the district attorney's investigation as a shield to not have to answer questions. I believe they've used it to help cover up. Now, my understanding is the district attorney is doing a criminal investigation. Who knows if criminal activity occurred? He'll investigate that. But what about gross incompetence? What about forgetting to order ballot paper? They will not answer questions. And those same people are going to be conducting the May election, which is outrageous.
So the fact that there's been no report, no evidence coming forward as to what happened, who's involved, there's no report from the district attorney, no report from your Secretary of State, no report from the Elections Board in this case. In your opinion, does that enhance the confidence of voters in Luzerne County regarding their elections, or does it hurt their confidence in the elections?
The voters of Luzerne County are disgusted. They've lost faith in their elections. They've lost faith in their election bureau. This is not the first election we've had problems. There were problems in the 20 and 21 elections. This takes the cake, of course. They ran out of paper. But the amount of voters that have called me and told me that they may not vote ever again because they don't believe their vote matters, it's really a sad day for American democracy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bognett. Appreciate your time with us today. Let me shift briefly, if I can, to you, Ms. Alicia Hoffman-Mirolovich. In this election, did every eligible citizen who wanted to vote, were they able to vote, yes or no?
I don't know.
You don't know if there were individuals in Luzerne County who were attempting to vote but were unable to?
I have no knowledge. I'm not part of the administration.
Understood. Okay, so you're unclear. I think by the end of today's hearing, maybe that will be cleared up for you. Should every eligible citizen who wants to vote be able to vote, in your opinion, yes or no?
Absolutely. That is part of what our organization fights for every day.
Do you consider voters being turned away from their polling location by election officials on Election Day a form of voter suppression, yes or no?
Yes.
So you're unsure if citizens were turned away and unable to vote. I think we'll be able to show that later. You said you don't know that. But if that's the case, you do view that as a form of voter suppression?
Yes.
I have no further questions. I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for the purpose of asking questions of the witnesses for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start, Mr. Bognett. You indicated that the county is not answering questions. Are you aware that the Luzerne County Solicitor's Office advised the Election Board to decline the invitation to testify here due to the ongoing investigation, that they're acting under advice given to them by the Luzerne County Solicitor's Office?
I read that in the newspaper, yes.
You did, so you are aware of that. Wouldn't it, in your view, given that information, wouldn't it be prudent for them not to testify? You think they should violate?
I can't opine on the prudency, but I think the citizens deserve answers.
Well, they absolutely deserve answers. This is catastrophic in my view. This is a complete breakdown of whatever happened. I don't know what happened. Sadly, I haven't learned anything about what happened, but you just said a few minutes that there was a cover-up, and I'm suggesting that the county solicitor's office advised the election board not to testify because of the ongoing investigations. I'm trying to reconcile those two different things.
CYA, they're CYA. The lawyers trying to cover their butt.
So you think the Luzerne County lawyers are trying to cover their rear end by suggesting people cooperate with the district attorney's investigation rather than testifying in Washington?
By not ever answering a question from a voter. 4.5 months, no answers, zero.
Do you have personal knowledge the extent of which county officials have cooperated or not with the district attorney's investigation?
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. Do you, can I ask you, did you file a election contest with the House?
No.
Despite the fact you had these concerns about a potential cover-up?
Yes.
Can you tell me why?
we looked at all the evidence, and as we learned about what a House administration contest is, we don't have the answers that we need, and that's why we're so happy you guys are looking into it. Our understanding was a full contest would deprive the citizens of the 8th District of Pennsylvania of representation for months or even years while it was worked out. I did not want to deprive the citizens of the 8th District of representation. All I want is answers to what occurred and how it happened.
Do you, Mr. Bognet, do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election?
In 2020, Mr. Biden received more votes in the Electoral College, which is how we adjudicate how presidents are elected. So by that standard, he is the president, although I have profound disagreement with the way the election was handled in 2020 in Pennsylvania, and I fought for more election reform.
Well, I wasn't asking when the Electoral College. Do you think he won the popular election vote?
Well, I believe that he won the popular election vote from the reports I've seen in the media, but I know in Pennsylvania it was not a really well-done election.
Well, let me ask this one last question, and then I want to shift over. Who orders the paper for the election? Who's responsible for that?
That's a great question, and I hope you guys would ask Ms. McBride and Ms. Williams that when they get their butt down here.
So you don't know who, you're suggesting there's a cover-up, but you don't know by whom?
We don't know who. They won't answer questions. They won't tell us who is responsible for it. They've abdicated their responsibility to tell us who orders the paper. That's what we want to know.
Okay. If I could ask Mr. Gibbons, you testified to the fact that, or you made some representations about the state essentially being responsible for the chaos that ensued. Is that correct?
I wouldn't put full responsibility with them, but I was in Luzerne for the month of November throughout the ballot canvass.
Well, let me interrupt you. You said it is a failure by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and its State Department, and then you said later Pennsylvania has a reputation for inconsistent election throughout its 67 counties, which can be largely attributed to a lack of leadership from the Pennsylvania Department of State. So.
Yeah, there's differences in how counties handle curing undated ballots. There is inconsistency among the counties throughout the state.
Okay,
and it was disappointing not to see the state show up at the canvass or on election day.
Well, let me reclaim my time. I'm sorry. I hate to do this, but I'm limited. The letter from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of State says the administration of elections in Pennsylvania is primarily the responsibility of county officials. Each one of the 67 counties is responsible for ensuring that elections of the county are run effectively. And so we have very few exceptions unrelated to the issues here. The state has limited authority under the election code to dictate how counties run their elections. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, but the county failed, and the state was nowhere to be found.
I don't know. Well, the state on that day, was the state supposed to step in the midst of all this chaos? Are you familiar with
Luzerne needed help on election day.
Are you familiar with the home rule charter rules in the state of Pennsylvania?
Not familiar enough to discuss it here.
Okay, I'll yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Loudermilk's recognized.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. May I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article dated February 15th, 2023, entitled Why Election Problems Continue to Plague This Northeast Pennsylvania County, which describes much of the election-related dysfunction in Luzerne County in recent years. I also ask unanimous consent to enter an article dated March 20th, 2023, entitled All Three Luzerne County Officials Invited to Testify at Election Hearing Will Not Go. A letter from the Pennsylvania Deputy Secretary of State, Jonathan Marks, to Chairman Stile declining the majority's invitation to testify at this hearing. A copy of the Luzerne County Home Rule Charter, a screenshot of the Pennsylvania Secretary of State's senior staff page showing the position of Director of the Bureau of Election Security and Technology as vacant.
Despite these documents not being provided to the majority prior to the hearing, without objection, so ordered. Mr. Loudermilk is now recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of questioning our witnesses.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Very important issues that, at one time this committee was considered the parking committee until 2020 because part of our area of jurisdiction is federal elections, and that catapulted us really into a high visibility position. But more than that, it's very important that we deal with these issues. This is highly concerning. But Mr. Gibbons, simple question: why is it important that voters have confidence that their votes will actually be counted?
It's important that voters show up and take part in the process, and without confidence in the election system to run properly, some of those voters may not show up.
I agree with you, and that if I've had several voters tell me, I want to make sure that my vote counts before I go to the poll, because many voters have to take time off work, or there's long lines, especially in very popular elections. And we saw this in Georgia during the 2020 election runoff period because of rumors, whether founded or unfounded, that there were problems with the general election in 2020. We had a runoff election for the Senate, and we had much lower turnout for that runoff, much lower than we've had in other turnouts and many in previous elections. And many of the people said they just believed that their vote wouldn't count. And so it made a significant difference. To me, that is a form of voter suppression. When you make people think that their vote is not going to count. And with that, regarding what's going on in Pennsylvania, would not having ballots available for voters who vote in person at their precinct on Election Day be a form of voter suppression?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I have no other questions, Mr. Chair, and I'll save the rest for the second panel. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Sewell is recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our witnesses here today. As the ranking member on the subcommittee on federal elections, and as a person who represents my hometown of Selma, Alabama, where voters marched, many, were bludgeoned on a bridge like John Lewis for the equal right of all Americans to vote. This is very personal for me, and look, I think that any time a voter, a legitimate voter, finds it harder, more difficult to vote, isn't given access to vote, it's a bad thing. And I think every one of us on this committee believes that. I also know that we need more resources in order to give to states and to localities in order to effectively be able to do their jobs. I also understand that Luzerne has had many problems, some structural. And I think that Ms. Huffman Milovich, you actually talked about that a little bit. Can you explain just some of the structural problems that have historically plagued Luzerne County? And then also talk to me about whether or not there's an adequate funding really to allow not just the elected officials to do their job, but also to make sure that we have proper oversight to make sure that people are doing the right thing.
As I said in my oral as well as written testimony, we have had an extremely high turnover in our Bureau of Elections. And as was pointed out, we do have a home rule charter that is very different than any other county in Pennsylvania. I will say that we have been talking about the Director of Elections being Beth Gilbert. I would like to point out that she was acting Director of Elections because she was hired, as in my testimony, my written testimony, was hired the summer before as the Deputy Director. She is not the Director of Elections right now. They hired a Director of Elections.
Why do you think that there was such high turnover in this particular position?
I think that there's not enough funding to pay people properly. I think that's the number one. This is a lot of work. If you're not administering one election, you are getting ready for the next election. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a lot of negativity to this. We see this on council meetings as well, that from citizens from both sides of the aisle. Like, there is anger. Things happen all the time with that. So I would say that this just negative environment, toxic environment in some cases, is one that attributes to that, of also just not paying and finding proper officials who are ready to go.
And good staff, exactly.
Or they want to be mentored, and they're going into a position to be mentored, but then we end up with high turnover.
And Commissioner Palmer, as a commissioner on the Election Assistance Commission, do you feel that you have adequate funding in order to provide grant opportunities to states and localities so that they can adequately fund, mentor, train appropriate staff to conduct elections across this nation?
I think that most of the funding takes place at the local level, so it's a reflection of what their budgets are. And I think there's a role for the state and federal government to provide additional funding or supportive funding to help counties, particularly those that have with resources.
What do you think about federal oversight? Is federal oversight necessary when we think about election integrity and election administration?
Well, I think there's a limited role for the federal government. I wouldn't even call it oversight. I mean, I served at the state level, and you know, there's a limited amount of uniformity and oversight that the state provides for so many counties that are on the ground administering elections. In the end, the counties themselves are on the ground. They're the ones
They are, but at the end of the day, if states and localities go amok or are not sufficient in their administration of their elections, like Luzerne, I think all of us know this, federal oversight, being able to make sure that there's someone, you know, making sure that there's uniformity, there's more resources, and the like. Right now, with the Shelby versus Holder decision, there really isn't any federal oversight of elections at all. And we know that federal elections are in the purview of the Constitution, Congress. And so, look, I just wanted to also admit for the record this ACLU statement with respect to the ACLU of Pennsylvania in terms of not having sufficient funding.
Without objection, so ordered.
And lastly, I just want to say that I think it's really important that we look at the president's budget. I know that he suggested $5 billion for the Election Assistance Commission to be able to provide grants for administration of elections. I think that we all owe it to make sure that we can do everything we possibly can to make sure that local governments have the sufficient funding they need in order to do their job. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. Mr. Griffith is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Palmer, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
So let me ask you the point blank and face up. You were serving Governor McDonald in an election capacity. If this had happened in any of the cities or counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the cities in Virginia have charters that are each unique and individual to themselves, would he not have had you and your colleagues from the Department of Elections on the carpet to find out what in the heck was going on? It's a full report on that.
Well, unfortunately, these things do occur occasionally, and in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have a state board of elections, and we had an investigation into similar type of deficiencies at the polling place on an election day or during the early voting process. Usually, there would have been an investigation, and people would have been called down to the carpet to explain what happened and how can we fix this.
Ms. Hoffman Marilovich, I hope I got close.
Close, yes.
You said in your testimony that you caution us that the district attorney's investigation is ongoing and therefore we do not have a full and complete accounting of what occurred on election day. Now, I don't know what the charter says, but I doubt the charter gives the district attorney the ability to look into negligence or malfeasance in office, but only to criminal matters. Am I somehow wrong on that? Is the Commonwealth different that their prosecutor investigates negligent cases?
I do not know that information.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I didn't expect you did, but I caution that we put too much reliance on the district attorney because he's only looking at crimes. I've not heard anybody allege that a crime occurred here. What I've heard alleged is there was malfeasance in office, negligence, and incompetency. Mr. Bognet, is that my understanding of what you're concerned about and why you want answers?
Well, that is a major portion. I assume that if the DA is investigating, he at least has a good faith reason to look at criminal activity. I don't know if criminal activity occurred. I do know gross incompetence occurred.
Let me ask you this, though. It's a federal election. Does he have jurisdiction?
I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer to that either. Interesting question. It's run by the state, but it's a federal election. All right, so we got a couple of witnesses who aren't here. What were their names again? The people who refused to come in and testify that you want answers from.
Ms. McBride, the head of the Election Bureau, and Ms. Williams, the head of the Election Commission.
And do you think this committee should subpoena them to testify?
100%.
Mr. Gibbons, you think they should be subpoenaed to testify?
I'm uncertain.
You're uncertain. Is that because you're worried that there might have been some criminal activity and it might take the fifth instead of coming to testify?
I'm not sure. The DA's investigation did complicate the matter. We were there just trying to get facts and figure out what happened, and it became even more difficult when it was referred to the district attorney.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be indicative if there was? I mean, if they think there's some kind of a criminal activity, I mean, they're not here today. They clearly are trying to hide something. Do they think there's some kind of criminal activity? Is that why it was referred to the district attorney? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to get answers because I believe that there was clear incompetence and malfeasance, but I'm just trying to get the answers. Why wouldn't they want to come forward? And they still have their Fifth Amendment rights. I'm not taking that away from anybody, but is that why everybody's clammed up?
I believe that decision to the committee.
But you're an attorney. You're an attorney, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it usual in a case where there's no liability, these people aren't going to be sued for money themselves? They might lose their job, but they're not going to be sued for money themselves. Wouldn't a normal person immediately assume that maybe they think they committed some kind of a criminal offense?
If it would help get to the bottom of this, it could be a good idea.
To subpoena them. And I appreciate that. Ms. Hoffman-Mirolovich, you think we ought to get these answers? I mean, I think you do, but tell me on the record, do you think we ought to get these answers and subpoena these witnesses in here?
I do think that we should get these answers, but I will say in the articles that are referenced in my written testimony, Denise Williams, the Elections Board Director, is first of all a voluntary position, but secondly was wanting to come until the county solicitor told them not to attend. So I do know that just from the written newspaper record, as well as that the same thing happened because the chair of the county council, Kendra Radel, was also invited.
And Mr. Chairman, I think we need to look into this aspect and subpoena these witnesses. I think we ought to subpoena the county solicitor to find out why he is interfering in the investigation of a federal election by the federal body responsible for making sure there's integrity in the election. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Torres is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Bognet, I could totally understand your frustration. It's unacceptable to run out of, basic supplies. My question really is to Commissioner Palmer. You mentioned in your testimony that the EAC is working to launch a field services program so that you can closely work together in order to improve the quality of monitoring. In the case of Mr. Bognet, it wasn't just monitoring the day of. Obviously, we have to look ahead, long before an election. We have seen across the country where we have state legislative bodies that are prohibiting and ordering the closure of certain polling locations that target minorities and communities. 12-hour, wait to cast your vote, I would say that is also a major suppression of the vote. In the case of Mr. Bognet, I'm not sure if Democrats were told you can cut to the front of the line and Republicans, you have to wait until we run out of paper. That would be, a gross criminal matter, I would think. But the issue of the long lines is just as important as the issue of running out of paper. The issue of having to vote on a provisional ballot is also an important issue. I don't, as a voter, in my community, I never want to vote through a provisional ballot because I have a voting record that I want to maintain. I've never missed an election since I became a U.S. citizen here. So funding is an issue. How can we help you improve conditions so that we're monitoring not just Republican red areas, but we're monitoring because we care about all voters?
Well, I think that, we appreciate the funding at the EAC, and what we try to do is take an assistance role for the states and localities. And what that means is is how do we avoid in a situation, Luzerne, is you need to be prepared. You need to have checklists. You need to have the resources available.
I mean, they have been changing clerks and staff like we change our clothes every day. So how can you improve and
Right.
help them with technical assistance if they have zero experience?
Well, when it comes to that, professional training of election administrators to improve the recruitment and the retention of those. There is sort of a negativity environment right now where we're trying to retain election administrators. Many are retiring or moving on to other professions, some because of the negativity of the issues, some of the scrutiny. A lot of election administrators understand it comes with the business. I mean, if you're going to be in the business of democracy and facilitating the right to vote, is it's a valuable experience to serve as that. But there's also the scrutiny that if you fail and there's deficiencies, there's consequences.
I mean,
and so,
scrutiny is good, and if
It
you
is.
make a mistake, usually you try to avoid making those mistakes by being informed and asking a lot of questions ahead and knowing who to call. So in your opinion, what can we do? I'm asking you because
yes, I think
this
we
is
need
a huge problem.
I think we need to increase the professionalism and training of election administrators.
So is that something the federal government can do to assist?
We can do that. It serves that purpose of assisting the states and localities in the administration of their elections and the improvement of federal elections, yes.
Ms. Maralovich, can you comment on that?
Yes, I have been saying from the beginning, as has our organization, that we need more funding in our elections so that we can avoid this chronic turnover, and that we can better train election workers, whether they're poll workers, whether they're the workers in the actual office of the Bureau of Elections.
And is there a role for federal oversight when it comes to denying people in poor communities, the right to have a polling location near their community?
I think that every level of government needs to take part in helping with this funding.
Okay. What is your opinion of denying people a restroom break or the ability to receive a donation of a sandwich or water when you're standing in line for long, long hours? I mean, as a working mom, I don't know that I ever had that kind of money to pay for a babysitter to stand for 12 hours.
As a nonprofit organization, we fully support being able to do that because you want to give everyone the opportunity to vote.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Dr. Murphy is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to step back. I think everybody on the committee wants good elections for our entire country. I mean, I don't want to make this Republican or Democratic issue. What happened in this county was abysmal, flat out abysmal. But just to a couple comments, I don't really think this is a Republican-Democrat issue. It brought up an issue that needs to be addressed. Let me just ask a few questions because it's for my own edification. Mr. Bogdan, is there any difference on Election Day? How long is early voting? How long is early voting in that county?
I believe it's a week before the election.
All right, is it mail-in or in-person voting?
You can do either, but mail-in is much more common.
All right, but you can physically go and vote, okay. Do you know if there's any partisan split on voting day between Republicans and Democrats?
There is a profound split. In Pennsylvania, since we brought in no excuse mail-in 2019, Democrats typically win vast majorities, 70–80% of the mail-in vote. Republicans typically win election day vote. In Luzerne County, I won 62% of the election day vote overall. Our campaign estimates that in the places where there were paper shortages, which tended to be rural, I won 68% of the vote there. So there's definitely an equal protection problem that if if something like this happens on election day, it tends to disproportionately hurt Republicans in the same way if something happened in the mail-ins, it would tend to disproportionately hurt Democrats.
Of this county, what proportion was this county in your district of population-wise?
About 38%.
Okay, so a third of it. So significant.
The biggest county.
So I can understand, I would say that from Democrat, Republican, I could understand concern because your basically biggest population base had their voting program absolutely screwed up. Does anybody have any idea who instructed the chairman of the Election Board Bureau to seek consistency from the district attorney?
I can speak to that. The Election Bureau brought up at their post-election thing that upon advice of counsel, Luzerne County Solicitor, we're going to send this over to the district attorney. Those are questions that should be asked to those folks, but many voters have said to me, it seems like they are looking for a way to not answer questions publicly. They don't want to take responsibility for this.
You mean the election board?
The election
individuals
board
and the
the
chair?
election bureau, the employees that were doing the election. They've never answered a single question in public hearing from any voter on how this happened. We still don't know, as the ranking member said, who was responsible for ordering the paper.
So, I'll just submit this, and I would say this again for Republican or the absence of answering a question for that somewhat implies complicity. I'm not saying it is, but it implies complicity, and it implies knowledge of some perhaps wrongdoing. They're not taking the fifth, but they're shifting the blame. That's just unfortunate. Again, we want every person legally in this country to vote and have that vote counted, period. Then let the cards fall where they may. I'm just very disappointed. I'm just imagining if this had happened in my district, I'd have been, as we say in Eastern North Carolina, bless my heart, but I would have been really very, very irritated. So I still don't understand why it was moved to a DA, because unless they were inferring a criminal matter, but it seems to be more that it would be just that we don't want to answer the questions and we want to get it boggled down for some type of legal dispute.
In the press reports on why they wouldn't come to this hearing, they said the DA is investigating, but also we have another election coming up in 8 weeks. In May, we have our primary, and we don't want it to interfere with that. There's always another election coming. These same people that bungled this election are going to be doing our election in May. How does that sit with a resident of Luzerne County who's wondering, will their vote count in May?
So it's 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans on the election board.
That's correct.
As I understand. How are they how are they voted upon?
I believe they're appointed by council, and then 2 Republicans, 2 Dems, and then they pick the third one, who's the chairman, Ms. Williams, who's a Democrat, and also Ms. McBride, the head of the election board, is an elected Democrat member of the Wilkes-Barre City Council. So I agree with the ranking member that there is more Republicans on the council, but the people who actually administer the election, that is Democrat control.
Yeah, and I'm taking Republican, Democrat out of this. I really am. I don't, if a Republican county was doing this, I'd be just as ticked off, because that would be embarrassing to me. And so I just think we have a lot of work to do. I think the state of Pennsylvania needs to kick in before the federal government needs to kick in. The federal government doesn't need to be everything for everybody, for every citizen in this country. That's why we have cities, counties, and states. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Kerry is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from a Mark Benjis, Luzerne County resident.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. His statement is very short, but pretty telling, and I'll quickly read it. I entered the polling place at approximately 9 a.m. on Election Day. I was not allowed to run my ballot through the scanner tabulator because the paper was too thick. End of statement. I'm going to go into some questioning. Mr. Gibbons, on the ground in Luzerne County on Election Day?
On Election Day, I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, at our Election Day headquarters.
So were you aware that Luzerne County of having any election administration issues prior to the 2022 election?
Yes, for the 2022 election, about a week before they had mailed out 937 duplicate ballots, which we were in touch with the county on figuring out how they were going to resolve that issue.
So did you attend any of the Luzerne County Board of Election meetings on 11/14, 11/28, or 11/30?
Yeah, I traveled to Luzerne on Thursday following the election and was there up until probably about the 20th or so, I believe.
So generally speaking, you heard the testimony of the residents that were there. I mean, what was the general feeling from the residents that you saw?
There's great frustration from the residents. It was hard not to share that frustration with them being there. We were just trying to build facts and figure out how many ballots might be outstanding that needed to be counted. And throughout the entire canvass, no one from the county could really answer how many ballots still needed to be counted.
Okay, so, I mean, so did the Board of Election at any time talk about the steps that they were going to take at any one of these committee meetings, or any one of these committee, or the meetings that they had? Did any one of them, any board members say, these are the steps that we're going to do to move forward so this doesn't happen again?
I don't recall anything to the extent of how they would prevent this from happening in the future.
Did they basically just say that the investigation was going to be handed over to the district attorney? Is my understanding?
Yeah, they had a public meeting, I believe on November 14th, where they heard public comment, and at the end of that meeting, they voted to refer the matter to the district attorney.
Any idea how many people were actually on the ballot, or were there any issues that were on the ballot?
I don't have that with me right now.
Okay. Anybody else know that? I mean, were there any other ballot issues that were on the ballot at that time?
There were no ballot propositions. There was a governor's race, a Senate race, 2 congressional races, many state legislative races.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. De-Esposito is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following a career in the NYPD, I did spend some time in the Board of Elections taking care of physical and cyber and polling place security. And the Board of Elections, or the Elections Commission in general, I mean, they spend the year, in essence, preparing for the next election. Obviously, there are many things that they do for the community so that people have the right to vote, registrations, things of that nature. But in essence, they spend the year preparing for early voting. They prepare for Election Day. To any of your knowledge, was there ever any conversations amongst the election officials that there could possibly be a ballot shortage?
No, sir. Most of the conversation was about the mail-in ballots. We had problems with the mail-in ballots in 2020, getting them counted. So they purchased a $140,000 machine. Most of the attention seemed to be on getting the mail-in ballots right, because they're a relatively new thing.
So it's sort of look here and forget the man behind the curtain type of thing. Okay. So, I mean, what I don't understand is, during all the conversations, and you may not have the answers either because it seems like they're not answering the questions that are needed, but is there now any contingency plan? Is there any preparation? Is there, and I know these questions have been asked, but is there feeling from anyone that they are preparing to improve this in the future, or is this more of just shrug your shoulder and move on?
We don't know, because when we're asked, they say, we can't talk about it because it's under investigation by the DA. And then, you know, what I remember from the Board of Election hearing is there was public comment, which was great. But then when the public would turn to the Election Bureau head and say, what happened? Who was supposed to order the paper? We can't talk about that. This is only here for public comment. We can't answer any questions.
And I think anyone that's familiar with the election process and day of voting knows that the people and the individuals that work those polling places play a critical role, and you know, they could make the difference between chaos and organization. So do we feel that in this specific situation, the poll watchers and those that were working the elections were prepared and had the resources that they needed to do the job effectively?
Unequivocally, no. And it would be great if you hold another hearing, or if you come up and hold a field hearing to ask the judge of elections. They could not get a hold of the elections office in the main. They reported calling and getting sent to voicemail. So these poor people that are volunteering to run the election were not getting any answers. So they did their best. Some of them made photocopies. Some of them said write on a piece of paper, but there were no procedures. How do we handle this?
Right. They did their best to adapt and overcome, but didn't really have guidance. Okay. So obviously, we need more poll worker training in the future for, you know, I would assume that's across the nation and not just in this specific. Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes of clarification to our colleagues, I invited both members from the House of Representatives who represents portions of Luzerne County. Mr. Muser was able to join us today. And so Mr. Muser is waived on to the committee and is recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
May I, I just want to welcome him to our side of the aisle. We hope you're comfortable and might even hope to stay on this side. Welcome, sir.
The chair will note that there are no more seats on our side of the aisle. So Mr. Muser is recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you for being here, Mr. Muser.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate my colleagues welcoming very, very, very much. Thanks, thank you. So, as has been noted, November 8th, 2022, people showed up in Luzerne County to vote and were met by election officials telling them the polling location had run out of ballots. This was not at one polling location, it was at 48 out of 143, over one-third. One out of every three polling station had this significant problem. So the purpose of this hearing is, to the best of our ability, find out what went wrong, what steps have been taken or still need to be taken to ensure this does not happen again. And finally, what can be done to instill trust once again in Pennsylvania voters and restore the faith in this election process. This is why we are here today. We're also here because, to the best of my knowledge, and it seems the witnesses, we've received no account of how this occurred from those responsible, nor we received any plan for what is being done to correct and provide some assurances to the general public that this won't happen again. We have a primary election in Pennsylvania coming up on May 16th, less than 60 days from now, and we have no answers or no further confidence being built by those who've created these problems. So now, if this had been done, if responsibility had been taken and a plan for how this wouldn't occur again were presented, we very likely would not be here today. So here's what we know so far that is factual. I personally received calls as early as 7:30 a.m. on November 8th, throughout the rest of the day, stating that a polling location had run out of ballots. Throughout the rest of the morning, my phone blew up. And as you can see by the poster behind me of the magnitude of the disorganization that was taking place, of all of the voting locations that ran out of ballots, and people were doing everything they possibly could to get some sort of paper into people's hands so they could do provisionals or just vote in any way possible. So this was at noon. We also know that there had been advisories sent earlier in weeks prior of the potential supply chain issues, specifically relating to ballot paper. And clearly, in Luzerne County, these issuances and advisories were completely and utterly ignored. We know that there was mass confusion at polling stations, at polling locations, despite election officials' best efforts to remedy the situation on the spot. We've also heard reports of security issues, that amid the chaos and confusion, there were makeshift ballots cast. I've even heard from someone that I trust very much that a stack of makeshift ballots were placed on and left unattended on a chair to be counted later. I suppose to be counted later. So this is what went on Election Day in Luzerne County, November 8th. So to start off, Mr. Palmer, Pennsylvania has a statute on the books, Title 25, Section 2967, that states the county board of each county shall provide for each election district a supply of official election ballots. And this goes on to spell out in subsection 8, any general election an amount equal to at least 100% of the total number of registered electors, makes sense, less the number of registered electors in the election district who requested an absentee or mail-in ballot. I ask unanimous consent to enter this state statute into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you. So, Mr. Palmer, do you think Luzerne County fulfilled its obligation under the law?
Well, again, I'm not sure what the exact legal requirements are, but they should have prepared and ordered more ballots for Election Day ballot stock to prepare for that. Or they should have had backup plans with ballot on demand or some other options for a Plan B if they would have run out of ballot stock. So, yes.
Okay, a paper shortage.
Yes.
How could something like this have happened?
The election administrator either did not order or ordered not enough ballot stock. They did not anticipate the turnout that would be on Election Day. And
Turnout, 7:30 a.m.?
well, it could be, actually, I was listening to some of the testimony that was from a witness here. It could have been the lack of ballot stock, but also inappropriate ballot stock. If they ordered ballot stock
Thank you. I got to reclaim my time. My apologies. Mr. Bognet, have you heard or any published or outreach made to the citizens to increase confidence or explain to the citizens what took place, why it took place, and what's being done to correct it?
There has been absolutely no communication from our officials in Luzerne County to explain what happened, to tell us the procedures they're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, to apologize for the citizens who were disenfranchised, and to get people to believe in our elections again. We have not heard one word.
Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Lee is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the former Secretary of State of Florida, I know well how important preparation and planning are to the administration of elections. And in order for Americans to have confidence in their elections, voters need to have equal access to voting. This includes polling stations having the necessary equipment and resources to allow all voters' voices to be heard. Luzerne County, as we've heard today, is an example of a failure to provide such access. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a brief statement from Bernadette Hyvish, a Luzerne County voter who had difficulty voting last November.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this statement. Quote, I arrived at the polling location at 6:45 a.m. I was the first person from the Mayflower section of Wilkes Barre to sign in. After doing this, the poll workers were then told not to sign anyone in because the machines were not working correctly. It was going on for approximately 7:40 a.m., and I had to get back to work when I asked for a provisional ballot. I was not happy doing it this way, but because I was already signed in, I could not leave and come back. I went back to the polling location around 7:30 to see if I could have my provisional ballot polled and vote by machine. I knew it was a long shot, but was not confident my vote would be counted. Commissioner Palmer, I would like to address my questions to you. First, isn't it true that the EAC issued warnings to local election officials that there might be paper shortages in 2022?
Yes, ma'am. That was a number of months prior to the election, including back into the primary, that there were shortages in paper stock.
And isn't it also correct that the EAC advised jurisdictions that they should be taking steps to ensure that they had the necessary supply of paper to be prepared for the 2022 election?
In conjunction with our partners, we issued those warnings that they needed to prepare as early as possible. In fact, there were deadlines that, look, if you're ordering past this date, you're not insured to have adequate paper.
And for those jurisdictions that did follow the warnings and the advice that was issued by the EAC about ensuring that that supply was in place sufficiently in advance of the 22 election, they were successful, were they not?
They were, yes.
Commissioner Palmer, are you familiar with voting systems testing and certification?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you also familiar with standards and best practices that are used to maintain election integrity and security during the voting process?
Yes, I am.
In your opinion, is it appropriate for an election administrator at a precinct to be using standard paper for the purpose of tabulating ballots?
No, that's a security feature. That ensures that every ballot's being cast on ballot stock, a marked sense ballot, and not just a piece of paper. So it's a security feature. So once you dismiss that, you are opening it up to other issues. And that's why it's not a best practice.
And is the EAC willing, or has the EAC provided guidance to state and local election officials about the types of stock or the types of stock that can be used with certain voting systems?
Yes, so when a voting system comes into an accredited lab for testing, the manufacturer it provides that data on what the length, the thickness of the different types of ballots or paper stock that would be used. And so it's tested to those. It's not tested to paper or other configurations. And so once it's certified to that, the manufacturer and the user has an understanding of what ballot stock could be used with that voting equipment. Again, it's a very regimented process. So once you are outside that using regular pieces of paper, that's really, you're breaking down one of the security features of the process.
Is that certification process an important part of ensuring the security of elections?
I think so, because what it shows is that we are testing these systems for different manufacturers over and over with upgrades, and it shows that the system will work under under different circumstances, and so we will certify that at the federal level. And in fact, many states also have a certification process to ensure that the ballots that are used in your county or your state will work on those voting machines.
And would you share with us how the EAC can be involved with helping states identify and implement best practices when it comes to this testing and certification?
Well, we have a clearinghouse where we offer best practices to states on issues such as this. We have a subject matter experts in elections and in testing and certifications. These are technical experts. And so we hope to provide assistance to the states and localities when they need it on these type of issues.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Before we I thank the witnesses. Before we move on to our second panel of witnesses for today, we're going to play recorded testimony from a number of additional individuals. For members, this recorded testimony will be played on the monitors that are in the room, and for the public, it will be carried on live stream. First person is Mr. Eugene Daugherty. He is a resident of Luzerne County with a medical condition that limits his mobility. He and his wife heard polls were closed due to paper problems, but they had 2 extra hours to vote due to a court-ordered extension. But when he and his wife showed up, the precinct was still closed. This resulted in him and his wife being denied the right to vote. Let's watch. Let's watch.
My name is Eugene M. Daugherty. I live at 704 East Samuels Avenue, Hazleton, Pennsylvania, 18201. This particular area is in the 3rd Precinct, 1st Ward. I have voted at this location since 1966. On Election Day, I had heard of all of the problems that Luzerne County was having for not having sufficient amount of paper to have the voters register their votes. I also had heard of the judge that had decided to extend the hours by 2 hours from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. That particular day, my wife and I were busy, and our 2 of our children had come in from out of town. We decided to have dinner, and because of the extension, we would be able to spend time with our family and still be able to vote. At exactly 8:09 p.m., we arrived at the East End Fire Company, only to be informed that our unit was closed. We could not vote. We were denied the opportunity to vote in this election. Having been a resident for over 60 years, it annoyed me that our particular precinct is predominantly Republican. However, that was the only ward that was closed at 8 o'clock. I was told they were closed, they could not accept any more votes, and I was denied the right to vote. Evidently, the worker who was in charge of installing and picking up the voting machines took it upon himself to disregard a judge's decision and felt that he had more power than a judge and closed our precinct. This is incredible that as many elections as are performed over the years, that Luzerne County would hire someone who is so despicable that he feels he is more in charge than a presiding judge. I have never, in the 60-some years that I have been able to vote, been ever treated in such a manner. If you can't be a true American, then give it up. This man should never be allowed to represent Luzerne County or any government for the rest of his life. I am very upset that my wife and I were denied the right to vote. Shame on him, shame on the county. We are true Americans. We are business people. We work for the better of our community. My family has been involved in organizations that have helped our community. I am a past JC president, JC regional vice president. I've been a member of the Hazleton Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved in civic organizations. I've been a Rotarian since 1983 and continue to be one. And my family has also been committed to serving the community. My father is a past Rotarian president. My brother is a past Rotarian president. My daughter is a past Rotarian president. My son is a past Rotarian president. And so am I. 5 out of 3 generations. I guess it does show that we are committed to our community and we love the United States of America. People who work for the government should not have itineraries for their purpose. Get them out of office. I thank you for your time, and I hope this is taken care of and hopefully doesn't happen again. Good night, and God bless.
Next video is Kim Berger, who is a resident of Luzerne County and tells her story of voting on a copy of provisional ballot because her precinct ran out of ballot paper. While more ballots were promised to arrive at the precinct, and Kim waited for standard ballots to arrive, they never showed up. Finally, when she later checked to see if her vote counted, she found out that despite all that she had been through, it did not. Let's play the clip.
Hello, my name is Kim Berger. Berger spelled B-U-E-R-G-E-R. I live in Hunlock Creek, Pennsylvania, which is Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, Legislative District 117. I vote at the Hunlock Creek Fire Hall, and that is Hunlock Township. Thank you for allowing me to tell you my story regarding the Election Day ballot paper shortage, which happened on November 8th, 2022 in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. My coworker and I usually go vote together at lunchtime. This time she left early and she went to vote first. I got a text from her saying, "Kim, don't come down to vote. They are out of paper." I did not understand what that meant, so I texted her back and I said, "What do you mean out of paper?" And she said that the paper for the voting machines is special type and they don't have any there. They had 100 emergency ballots and 100 provisional ballots. And they already used up the emergency ballots and were almost out of provisional ballots. So she suggested I wait and come down later when they got the paper. So I did not go down to vote at that point. At 3:30 that afternoon, I text someone down at the fire hall. And I had asked if they had gotten the paper. And that person said no, they did not get the paper. If I could wait and come down later, it would probably be best. So I waited until 6:30 p.m. and I went to the voting place assuming they would have the paper, but they did not. When I registered, after I registered, they handed me a copy of the provisional ballot. I went to sit at a table next to some of my neighbors, and I voted on this copy of a provisional ballot. When I was done, I handed it to the judge of elections there at our polling place, and she put it on top of a pile, a stack, and just laid it there. There was no security, no lockbox, no nothing. At that point, I said, are our ballots going to count? And no one could answer that. No one really knew if they were going to count or not. More recently, I found out that I could go online and check to see if my vote was counted. So I did that. And when I did that, I entered all the information that they required. And when I did that, it came up saying a certified provisional ballot was not found. This did not surprise me in the sense that when they made a copy of the provisional ballot, we all had the same number on them. So, needless to say, I don't know if my vote counted or not. Very discouraged about our election here in Luzerne County, and I am thankful that you are looking into this matter, and I hope there is an answer if my vote counted or not. Thank you very much.
Bill Dwyer was an election constable in Larksville, Ward 2.
Mr. Chair, may I make a parliamentary inquiry? Are these, I notice it says testimony, are these videos, are the people under oath while they're, this says testimony?
To the ranker, that they are not under oath and they are not required to be.
So they're not testifying?
Just like written testimony is not sworn in.
So not sworn testimony. I might just, as part of my inquiry, just, first of all, the stories are powerful. I would love to have had the opportunity to ask them about their experience, since clearly what happened in Luzerne County is catastrophic. We could have done these, people could have been remote. We could have then engaged in a back and forth, and that was apparently decided against. So rather than giving the members of Congress a chance to ask questions about their experience, they've been submitted, they're submitting now not as witnesses, not under oath, but simply videos. That's how we'll proceed?
Does the gentleman have a parliamentary inquiry?
That's my inquiry. Are we going to do this in the future where we're going to take videos not under oath as part of some unofficial?
That's not a parliamentary inquiry.
It's not? It's a question. It's an inquiry. Is this going to be the committee's procedure now on a going forward basis?
Again, it's not a parliamentary inquiry, so I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
It's a procedural inquiry.
So let's move on. Brian Dyer was an election constable in Larksville, Ward 2. He testified at the Luzerne County Board of Elections meeting on November 14th. He watched firsthand as voters were turned away from the polls, and many did not return because of the ballot paper shortage. So if we could just watch.
Again, we turned away, as an accurate estimate, some 50 voters when we had no operating machines and no printer paper and no paper ballots. In our best estimates, only about 20 of those citizens came back to vote. Some of those turned away voters had been turned away in the morning when the voting machines were inoperable because they had to go to work. Then they heard from other members of the community that the voting machines were working, only to find when they came back that they couldn't use them when they showed up a second time because we were out of copier paper. Again, Luzerne County cannot in good faith certify this election. Printer paper has never been an issue at this polling place in the past 3 election cycles. There have been other issues, but not the amount of printer paper. We average a very consistent voter turnout of some 400 voters through that polling place, Larksville Ward 2. This equates to about 2 packages of printer paper, 500 sheets at our polling place at a cost of about $60 at Staples in Wilkes-Barre. Based on the above factual statements, there is no excuse for what went on that day. Screwing up one polling place is not acceptable, but it can happen. Someone still needs to be held accountable. Screwing up 4 or 5 polling places is not a mistake. It's an atrocity to the residents of this county, and someone needs to be fired. Screwing it up, as I understand it, the vast majority of polling places in Luzerne County rises to the level of criminality, and multiple people need to be held accountable. Again, there needs to be a competent investigation into what transpired on election day in this county, and it needs to be conducted by agencies outside of this county. Again, you can only start to rebuild the trust in voting of the residents of Luzerne County that you destroyed by having a competent investigation conducted by a competent outside state or federal agency into what went wrong on election day, November 2022.
Alyssa Fusero, a member of the Luzerne County Board of Elections, expresses outrage at a public hearing of the board in response to Mr. Dyer's testimony about turning voters away from the polls. Let's roll the clip, please.
No, I just have an inquiry about what we're doing now.
We're just trying to get it to work.
You know, I have a report here, minimum, right now, and we're talking about a constable. We're not talking about some, you know, even just a voter that says, oh, my friend, you know, whatever. We're talking about, we turned away as an accurate estimate some 50 voters. We had no operating machines, no printer paper, and no paper ballots. They turned away 50 voters at a thing, and he said only 20 of them came back that he estimates. That's a big problem. That is voter like suppression.
Move on to David Statler, who's a voter from Hunlock Township. He also testified at the Luzerne County Board of Election meeting on November 14th. His polling location ran out of paper at approximately 10 a.m. Here's the clip.
David Stetler, Hunlock Township. We were one of the
Last name, I'm sorry.
Stetler.
Stetler, okay.
We were one of the townships that ran out at 10 o'clock in the morning. We then went to emergency ballots, and at that point, failure to get any kind of answers from the Bureau of Elections went to provisional ballots. We waited for half an hour. Unfortunately, I had signed in, so I couldn't leave because I signed on the dotted line and they wouldn't allow me to come back. So people waited for half an hour, and finally, not getting an answer from the county, I said to the judge of elections, let me vote on a provisional ballot. At least I get a vote, and I don't stand here all day waiting. People left the lines. I don't know if they ever came back, but I can honestly say that when we're told that, and I saw it in the press, that we got paper delivered, Hunlock never got any paper, ever. So I checked with the judge of elections because I had gone back. I went to other townships trying to get paper. They didn't have any. They had run out as well. I don't understand how we could run out of paper. Starting in, I know somebody up in Mountaintop told me he ran out of paper at 8 o'clock in the morning. How do you run out of paper in the machines at 8 o'clock in the morning? And then, of course, we blow through the emergency ballots and we do provisional. Hunlock had to make copies of the provisional ballots because they had no other thing to do. They then ran out of paper at the fire hall, so they had to get paper and toner because they ran out of toner too. So the fire hall was doing all this for us. I'm stunned. I was a Republican committee man, and I'm just stunned that we could screw this up this badly in this county. I've heard so many stories, and I saw them in the newspaper. Obviously, what was done a couple of years ago to try to fix some of these problems has made it worse. I don't know if it's the contractors, but whoever you're hiring is not doing the job.
Pursuant to paragraph B of Committee Rule 6, we are now ready to move on to the second panel. I'm sorry. Pursuant to paragraph B, Committee Rule 6, all witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record show the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'll now introduce our second witness panel. Our first witness, Mr. Theodore Fitzgerald, currently works in a management and trainer capacity at ABC Bell Bonds and invests much of his time mentoring and helping ex-convicts reestablish themselves in the community. Our next witness, Mr. Benjamin Herring, is the Vice President of the Citizens Advisory of Pennsylvania, a nonprofit that advocates for the constitutional rights, educational choices, and happiness of northeastern Pennsylvania communities. Mr. Herring is a Marine Corps veteran deploying twice in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, and began his nonprofit service in 2021 when he realized the enormous lack of oversight within the public school system. And finally, Mr. James Walsh serves as president of the Citizens Advisory of Pennsylvania and owns a small business, the Homeboys Seamless Gutters, where he has helped homeowners with water management issues for over 2 years. We appreciate our witnesses being here today and look forward to your testimony. As a reminder, we have read your written statement and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you are to limit your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement unless I extend this time period in consultation with Ranking Member Morelli. Please remember to press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, it will turn yellow. And when the red light comes on, your 5 minutes has expired, and we ask at that point that you please wrap up and conclude your remarks. I now recognize Mr. Fitzgerald for 5 minutes.
I'm not as articulate as the rest of the people before me. I'm just a regular Joe worker, and I'm here just because I want to help not just clear up what happened, but also to try to come up with some solutions in the future so I never see you guys again. Okay, I'm going to go with what I wrote. I am a diabetic who lost 2 toes last year in 2022, and 1 previous the year before. On November 4th, my home health nurse was treating an open wound where my right toe had been because of a recent amputation. She noticed that the toe next to it got infected and called my podiatrist. She told me to admit myself into the emergency room as soon as possible. On the way to the emergency room, I stopped at Luzerne County Election Bureau to cast an absentee vote. I was supposed to show up at the polls. I did not know how long I was going to be in the hospital, and since I believe voting is one of the most important things an American citizen can do, I wanted to make sure my voice was heard. When I got to the Bureau of Elections, I explained what was going on and asked to submit an emergency ballot. I was given one and filled it out immediately. After filling out, the person put it in a manila security envelope, sealed it in front of me, and I asked if there was anything else I needed to do. She answered no, and then she proceeded to take the ballot to the back, and I left for the hospital. I went to the hospital and was admitted. I stayed until Monday when they amputated my toe and was released the same day. On November 8th, not feeling confident nor trusting the Luzerne County Bureau of Elections because of their past history nor their staffing, I went to my polling place to confirm my vote was submitted and counted. I also believe that they do not hire the best person for the job at the Bureau, but they hire their friends and or people with the same party affiliations and party agenda. I also believe that I have a proof that this occurs. After the last recent hiring, I filed the right to know for the applications that apply for the position of Deputy Director of Elections. I wanted to see if Luzerne County hired the best applicant for the job. Luzerne County denied my request, so I appealed to the state. I won the applications. It shows the best person, I believe it shows the best person was passed over for a connected elected official. Back to November 8th. When I got to my polling place, I explained I voted on the 4th and asked if they could check to see if my vote was counted. They checked, and they said that it was not, and they could not even find me on the voter list. Then they called the Bureau of Elections by cell phone to see what they should do. The Bureau said I was inactive and could not vote. I said, that's impossible. I voted in the last election here at this precinct. That actually, you guys questioned my signature. I normally write a doctor's signature, but this time I had to write the full signature. They stayed on the phone and reiterated what I said. I then overheard the woman from the Bureau call out to another asking about me. She then said over the phone that they had me at 2 different addresses and found me. They said they have no record of me voting on that previous Friday, so to do a provisional. I questioned that. I said, isn't that illegal? I'm not supposed to or cannot vote twice. They assured me at that time I would not get in trouble, and they would find out if I voted twice because only one of the votes would count. So I filled out the provisional, and I left for that day. Basically, I'm here just to give that testimony. I think that's why, excuse my language, it's a shit show at Luzerne County Bureau. It's because they don't hire, they don't recruit right, they don't train right, and they have no management skills. They have people with good intentions, but they just don't have great leadership. I also have addressed the council, which is, again, 10-1 Republican to Democrat, to see if they can announce and just apologize to the public, not an apology of guilt, but just of empathy. I also went to the county manager, asked the same. I went to the department head, asked the same. I also went to the Bureau of Elections and asked the same. All we want is an apology. We want the affirmation that elections moving forward will be held responsible and our vote counts. And I think they should announce that on the newspaper, let people know that if you were disenfranchised, come back, vote. We want everybody's vote to be heard. And I know that Mr. Morelli said that it is 10-1 council. But in the Bureau of Elections, it's the opposite. There's only one Republican, and everybody at the Bureau of Elections is all Democrat. So the people that made the mistake and had the power wasn't the council. They have no purview. The people at the board are the responsible people for the public. Also, the board is a 3-2 Democrat, and they're more concerned, and all the meetings before that, they were more interested in drop boxes than making sure there was policies, procedures, inventory. I have an inventory on my things. God, you walk into a closet, if you see there's no paper, order the damn paper. I mean, a moron could do that. So basically, I think there's just horrible management, horrible training, horrible recruitment. And if you want to change the elections in Luzerne County, you need to fix that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Now recognize Mr. Herring for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Oh, too close. Good morning, Chairman Loudermilk now, Ranking Member Morelli, and the remaining members of the Committee on House Administration. My name is Ben Herring, and I'm here before this committee today to talk about one of the most crucial and fundamental rights all Americans have, which is the ability to vote. I was raised by military parents, grew up on military bases all across the globe, and decided in 2003 to take the sacred oath myself by joining the United States Marine Corps. As a Marine Corps veteran, I served in Fallujah, Iraq in 2004 during Operation Phantom Fury, as well as in the Korangal Valley of Afghanistan in 2006. I joined the Marine Corps after 9/11, and I spent my time spent alongside my brothers and sisters in arms will forever be a part of my foundation, and it's part of the reason I'm here today. Why this is germane to my service in some way is in 2005, I was in Iraq for the very first Iraqi elections. I got to see the face and the joy and the hope on Iraqi citizens' faces when they knew that there was a change coming and they can actually elect their own officials and actually try and carve the way for the future of their country versus the previous dictatorship rule. So to see that and to correspond that with America, I mean, we should never be behind 2005 Iraq when it comes to actual elections and election integrity and ensuring everybody has the right to vote. The issues that occurred in Luzerne County for the 2022 midterm elections represent a culture which embodies exactly what is permeating, in my opinion, throughout our entire nation. A complete lack of respect and understanding of what it really is to be a public servant and the correlation of public service to transparency and accountability, words that I've heard here this morning. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a law known as the Sunshine Act, which, like many states, was enacted directly following the Watergate scandal, and it was used so that citizens could have a look into governmental affairs and when taxpayer funds are used and when decisions are made using those taxpayer funds, the public deserves a right to know what's happening. So due to the Sunshine Act and due to just being a citizen that has a familiarity with it, after this whole situation transpired and I went to the election board meeting on November 14, that's also been talked about this morning, I asked questions directly to the officials that you've heard. The Board of Election, the chair of the Board of Elections, the acting director of Luzerne County Elections, and the Election Bureau was also there. So the officials that needed to answer those questions were in that room. Now, while the Sunshine Act, and I have this in my testimony, it does not require the actual law, like the legal language, the statute does not require that you answer questions. And I know this is a totally separate topic, but when you go to a public meeting and you have questions such as what transpired that you all heard this morning, I believe it should be prudent that somebody at least gives some type of an answer. Simply saying that they don't have to answer the question or ignoring the questions from the public is not acceptable. So she didn't answer to us during that meeting. I say she, so I'm talking the election board, the chair of the election board, or any of the officials that you all invited down here. They have not answered us as citizens. They did not come down here as witnesses today, as is well documented. So my question is, who do they respond to? Who are they accountable to? Because we're here today to express our frustration, and you've also heard other frustration, but I think the underlying question is, if they don't answer to us as citizens, as per our Luzerne County Charter, then who do they answer to? And I'm really glad that Congress is having some oversight on this topic, because it's very important. I'd like to draw attention quickly to one particular submission which surrounds what's known as Papergate in Luzerne County. I requested through my right to know process to receive copy of all procurements conducted by Luzerne County that were applicable to supporting the 2022 midterm elections. The results I received from the county confirmed my concerns. They did not purchase the paper for the elections. They have a binding contract with Dominion Voting Systems, as you've seen also across the nation, but Luzerne County officials were responsible for ordering the paper. Nobody in an elected capacity has testified to that, but I'm here today to tell you that I did find that, and that is the truth. A voter simply cannot enter their ballot into a tabulator if there's no paper to print the ballot onto. In what conceivable world is this allowed to happen? Well, I have allotted documentation. I'll provide that, obviously, to this committee, enter into the record. I want to point out two quick things. Luzerne County reported 117,495 ballots cast by voters for the 2022 midterm elections. On election day, and I have the receipts as part of my right to know request, 76,000 sheets of paper were purchased either by the county or by citizens in order to get the precincts back up and running. That is 65% of the voting population for the entire county. I heard earlier today maybe there was a lack of institutional knowledge. I'm sorry, but 65% of possible ballots needing to be ordered on election day is not a lack of institutional knowledge. Something occurred here. It was either willful or it was a gross mistake. Either way, we have no transparency and we have no accountability.
Thank you, Mr. Herring, and thank you for your service to our country. Chair recognizes Mr. James Walsh for 5 minutes.
Chairman Loudermilk, may I state an objection prior to starting my statement here at this committee?
You may.
So when this hearing started, there was 10 members here. You don't even have a quorum now. There's 3 members of this committee sitting here listening to the citizen statements. You don't even have a quorum right now to discuss this. Now, I spent money out of my own pocket. I bought a new suit to be here in front of you. I stayed at a hotel last night. I spent gas money to come down here, time away from my business and my family. Here to talk about these 30 affidavits from concerned citizens of Luzerne County, and I think the lack of a quorum here is an absolute disgrace by this committee.
We appreciate you being here. As you may well realize, we have a number of hearings that are going on simultaneously, and we have a number of members that, from both parties, that serve on multiple committees. We, in fact, do have a quorum on this committee at this point, and we appreciate your concerns, duly noted, and you may proceed with your statement.
Thank you. Chairman Loudermilk, Ranking Member Morelli, and distinguished members of this committee that's left here. Thank you for having me here today. My name is James Walsh, and I am grateful to have this opportunity to share testimony with you from some of the concerned registered voters of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Within Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 7, subsection 4, it states the following: all elections by citizens shall be by ballot or by such other method as prescribed by law, provided that secrecy in voting is preserved. Article 7, subsection 6 states that all laws regulating the holding of elections by the citizens or the registration of electors shall be uniform throughout the state. The 2022 general election in Luzerne County was conducted in violation of Article 7, subsections 4 and 6 of the Pennsylvania State Constitution. The violations that took place were a direct result from the lack of paper in Luzerne County in order to print ballots at the polling stations, which in turn resulted in voter suppression countywide. I have obtained affidavits from 30 registered voters within the county representing 7 out of the 186 precincts that I would like to submit today as part of the record. I'm not really sure how that works, but I would like to submit these as part of the record today.
Without objection, submit.
Thank you. Affidavits are both from Election Day poll workers and registered voters. For myself, the beginning of the chaos throughout Luzerne County began when I showed up at my polling location in Ross Township. Our judge of elections explained that she was sent 500 sheets of paper for 1,100 plus voters. She also stated that the Election Bureau didn't fill the printers prior to them being delivered. The Bureau did not send her electrical cords or power strips to power up the machines. The Bureau only sent her one scanner and one red privacy bag, where in years past she would receive 3 to 4. They did send 6 voting machines, however, one of the machines had to be rebooted 3 times before it would operate. She also stated that they only sent her one paper poll book and that in years past they would have 2 poll books separated by last name A through L and M to Z. The combination of these issues created extensive voting lines and up to a 35-minute wait for people to vote. When I left my polling location, I didn't know that some of the same issues were happening countywide. I turned on our local radio station and I started to hear reports from across the county that polls didn't have enough paper for voters to cast their ballots. Other poll workers in the affidavits that I submitted to you today reported that when they ran out of paper, they tried to call the Election Bureau and they couldn't get through. There are also reports of voters leaving the polling locations without voting at all, and no idea if they came back to their place once the polling place received paper. Within the affidavits from the voters, you will find that voters were using photocopies. Some reports from the Election Bureau stated that there was a special paper that needed to be used in the scanners. So regular paper that you might have lying around your house wouldn't be acceptable to use. So this is where the lack of uniformity ensued. Voters used photocopied ballots with no way to track if their ballot was counted. When using photocopied ballots, they were told to sit at tables to fill them out without any privacy or secrecy. Voters were told at different locations to handle their finished ballots differently by placing them into a box, drop them in the back of a printer, place them into a metal can or a container. One polling place told people to print their ballot and place it in the back of the broken scanner box. At another location, the ballot box was so full that the poll workers were unlocking it to shove more ballots in to fit more. Another affidavit states that they voted on the computer and printed the ballot, but they were told to put into a drop box instead of scanning it. Yet at another polling place, voters were told to print their ballots and hand them directly to a poll worker. Voters reported in the affidavits that they saw people were leaving the long lines and they didn't know if they ever came back. As you can clearly see from these affidavits submitted to you as record, this election was not secret or uniform. The delays at the polling locations due to the lack of paper created long lines, which in turn suppressed the voters. In closing, I gave you a sample from only 7 out of the 186 voting precincts. Our Election Bureau manager, Beth McBride, reported to the media that the paper shortage took place at a total of 48 polling precincts throughout the county. While investigating this, I found out that all 48 precincts that ran out of paper traditionally vote at a minimum 2-to-1 Republican. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I'll begin our questions today, followed by Ranking Member Morelli. And then we'll alternate between parties. I now recognize myself for the purpose of questioning our witnesses. Mr. Walsh, I'll start with you, and let me say that prior to coming to Congress, I was asked to come and testify as well. I was before one of the larger committees in the House, and when I went and sat down with the other panel members, there were more on the panel than there were in the audience, so I know exactly how you feel. But one thing I learned in that is, as we went along, most of the members did come in and were able to ask questions. So your written testimony is reviewed by members, and I believe you'll have at least most of the members on both sides back to ask questions today. And I'll start. Have you ever, or did you ever encounter a problem casting a ballot at your precinct prior to November 2022 general election?
No, sir.
None at all?
And I didn't experience a problem this time. I was just alerted to the problem because I was there first thing in the morning.
Okay. Well, thank you. A follow-up question is, the Bureau, is it responsible for the paper ballot shortage? If not, who is?
Well, according to, I think Mr. Herring would be better off to answer that question because he's the one that filed the right to know for the order of the paper.
Okay. Mr. Herring, do you care to answer?
Yes, Congressman, it is the Election Bureau. It is the hired personnel of Luzerne County that were to order the paper.
Okay, so it is the Election Bureau that's responsible.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I'll stay, since I got you already, Mr. Herring. Are you aware of other voting precincts running out of paper on Election Day?
Yes, Congressman, as my colleague, Mr. Walsh, stated, there's 48 precincts that we, just as regular, everyday guys like TJ said, just looked into to try and help out because we were getting a lot of people contacting us. So those 48 committees, as Mr. Walsh alluded to, traditionally at least 2-to-1 is more Republican voters than Democrat voters. And some of those precincts that ran out of paper, the margin is as high as 9-to-1 Republican.
Are these precincts all in the same county?
Yes, sir. They're all in the same county.
All right. Are you satisfied with the Bureau's response to the incident?
No, Congressman, not at all. There's been no response. It's been well documented today. But as I point out to again, the Sunshine Act in Pennsylvania does not preclude you from answering a question when a public brings it to you during a public meeting. That's what's disheartening to us as citizens, is we're answering simple questions during these public meetings, and they flat out refuse to answer them. And there's no law that says you cannot answer. And this was before it got referred to the district attorney, sir. So this is before all that happened.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. At this point, I will yield back and recognize Ranking Member Morelli for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Fitzgerald is one regular Joe to another.
Yes, sir.
I'm very sorry for what happened to you. I think it's completely inexcusable.
It's no big deal. We can move on and make it better tomorrow.
And you said the Election Bureau is responsible for ordering paper. Is that correct?
I think they're directly responsible, like in any business. Like if you have people that work in a business and also supervisors, I think everybody's responsible. I think that.
But in terms of the technical thing, I think you said the Election Bureau does it.
Yeah.
And Mr. Herring, you just testified to the same that the Election Bureau is responsible for the ordering of paper.
Yes, Congressman, there's a clause in the Dominion contract that specifically spells out that they will not provide consumables to the county.
Yeah, so, are either of you aware that the county manager has the power to hire, terminate, and manage all administrative staff, including the director of the Bureau of Elections?
Absolutely, he does, yep.
And it is important to note that the division head of administrative services who reports to the county manager is the person who directly oversees the Elections Bureau as well as the other 7 county divisions.
Correct.
So it's the Elections Bureau reports to the county council, and the county manager is the administrator who runs the Election Bureau.
The county council does appoint the
Manager.
Luzerne County manager, yes.
So it's actually, that bureau is underneath the county manager.
Correct.
And I understand that the county manager resigned just a couple of days after election.
That's correct.
I know, citing family obligations. Obviously, he's come under a great deal of questions about his role in this, but the Election Bureau, just to be clear, the Election Bureau works for the county manager.
That's a correct statement.
Mr. Fitzgerald, did you ever know if your vote got recorded, sir?
Yes, I did. I've actually found out yesterday.
And it did get recorded, sir?
Yes, it did.
Very good, thank you. I do want to say, Mr. Walsh, and I certainly agree with the chair that the members, I'm sure, don't mean disrespect that they have many things to do, but I would say also that I would be happy to work with the chair for the witnesses to be reimbursed under our committee rules for your expenses coming to and from Washington. I'd be happy to be supportive of that, and I'm happy to raise that with the chair about making sure that to the greatest degree possible we compensate you for that. Did you also know, Mr. Walsh, that the Bureau works for the county administration through the county manager?
Yes.
You did, okay. And just to, again, reflect on this, the county council, which hires the county manager, has 11 members, 10 of whom are Republicans. So I just note that as we're looking to what happened with Papergate. I also want to just note that one of the concerns I raised earlier about having witnesses give testimony or not under oath and not being able to be cross-examined, I note, and I'd like to have unanimous consent, both to enter into the record an article that's Luzerne County Report of Election Board Member Fusaro's actions differ from her account, and a confidential report of investigation by the Luzerne County Office of Law with the assistance of the Luzerne County Human Resources about Ms. Fusaro, whose recorded video was entered into the record. At one point, Ms. Fusaro in the report, I'll read from it, witness 2 stated that Alyssa Fusaro went to the front desk, was on the phone, and heard Alyssa Fusaro say, quote, "This spick don't know what the F she's doing." Witness 2 said she heard Alyssa Fusaro, quote, "spewing the F word, and her facial expression was like she was disgusted. That's when I told witness 1 to shut the F up, and then the guy told her to shut the F up." I'd like to submit with unanimous consent the confidential report of investigation by Luzerne County Office of Law with the assistance of Luzerne County Human Resources. And I do know that's one of the reasons we would want witnesses to testify in person, so that we can ask questions and refer to official reports and considerable differences between testimony given, although not under oath and not available to be cross-examined, and what they say in that testimony, how it differs. So if I'd like to enter those into the record, please.
Both without objection.
Thank you, sir. Given that
Mr.
my time
Chairman,
is-
I'm not sure at the time of that report, those 2 witnesses were under oath. So I would caution you about putting them on the record, because there was a certain time that they were not put under oath, and I don't know if they were ever put under oath and testified to that, so.
I know I'm over my time, but I'm not suggesting anything about that other than I would have liked under oath to question the witness, and that was my point. But anyway, I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yields back and now recognize Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask you unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from Michael Fratangelo, a poll greeter in Luzerne County.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll quickly read his statement. I was assigned to the Dallas Township Municipal Garage in Dallas District 3 as a poll greeter from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Election Day. The precinct experienced an issue of running out of paper ballots at the voting location in the late afternoon. Several voters had mentioned that they were unable to vote since the location ran out of ballots as they walked in and out of the building. A sheriff witnessed delivering more paper ballots later in the afternoon at a voting location. It is unclear if provisional ballots were used and how many individuals were unable to vote. However, other locations in the county, such as Harvey's Lake, were also affected by running out of paper ballots, according to the reports. Every voter should have the equal and fair opportunity to cast their ballots without any issue on Election Day. End of statement.
Without objection.
To the witnesses, and I know the chair pointed this out, we all do serve on multiple committees, and many of us have to run and juggle the time between each committee. So I want you to understand, though, that I was talking to committee staff when I was trying to squeeze in a little bit of lunch right before I came back out. We actually have, I think, 274 people that are actually watching this online. Many of the members and their staffs are watching it online while we're here because they've got to be in multiple other places. But I just thought I'd put that for the witnesses. I guess I'll start with Mr. Fitzgerald. About how long have you been voting in Luzerne County?
Me?
Yeah.
Don't quote me on this one, but I'd say about 5-6 years, and I was previously living in North Carolina, and previous to that, I was in Pennsylvania. So
Mr. Herring?
About 5 years.
5 years?
About 5
Mr.
years.
Since I returned from the Marine Corps in 2007.
Okay. Ms. Walsh?
Since I was old enough to vote. So that would be 30 years if I do the math right.
Well, you didn't have to give your age, Mr. Walsh. Are you confident, and I'll start with you, Mr. Fitzgerald, are you confident that the problems will be resolved in time for the 2024 election? If not, why?
Don't know. It's like anything in a business or in Congress or anything. It's how you address the problem, how honest you are about the problems, and the fighting between parties is stupid. I think what we should do is come together and figure out a solution and try to make so it can 100% be good in Luzerne County. It depends on, again, what I said, who we recruit, who we hire, how we train them, and the management. And it really comes down to that, and we work together as Americans. I think we can do better.
Thank you. Mr. Herring?
I believe without a full reconciliation, not only at the county level, but there's obviously a lot of issues right now with election integrity. I don't think a lot of people can say with confidence that they're ready for the next voting cycle. I do want to add one real quick thing. The accusations that were levied against a Republican member of the Luzerne County Election Board, she wanted to not certify the election until all of these issues were figured out. And lo and behold, a few days later, accusations appeared. And those accusations are now brought in front of this committee. So that's what we're dealing with in Luzerne County. It's kind of a microcosm of, I'm sure, what's national. But these are the same political partisan games that are happening there. So no, I don't have confidence.
Okay. Ms. Walsh?
No, sir, I do not believe that the voters in Luzerne County are confident whatsoever. In fact, I thought our confidence level was low to start the last election. It's at an all-time low now. Thank you.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. D'Esposito for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to follow up on Mr. Carey's questions, we know that we're not confident, so I guess I'm going to pose a similar question. And how do we regain that confidence?
Again, I think I just said that. I think, we can't gut the election bureau because then we have nobody, but somebody needs to be accountable. I think we need to address that. And again, we need to put all hands on deck, the county administrator, the county manager, maybe get some other county employees to come over and lend hands, outside help. And until we get a structure in place where for everything, like from a paperclip inventory to paper, to training, I think, for recruiting for poll watchers on a weekly basis, because we are an elderly community in Luzerne County, and most of our poll watchers are elderly. We're going to have issues in the future, and if we don't address them immediately, they're just going to get worse.
Thank you.
I would say, and it's a pretty simple concept, the bipartisanship would actually work. I mean, we as voters, depending if you go, Republican or Democrat, a lot of the precincts that were affected were one party. A lot of the folks that you hear from are one party, and that one party feels like they were disproportionately affected by this election. And I do want to point out that the acting election director for this last election was a city council Democrat. The election board is ran by a majority Democrat. So the only way to make confidence in the other side is by making them part of the process and not making this a partisan issue.
Thank you.
I think before we make it better, we have to know what happened. There's always solutions. And I really feel even between Republicans and Democrats, you can always find a win-win somewhere. I know it seems crazy these days, but I really believe that you can find a win-win. But if you don't know the core of the problem and what took place, how can you fix it?
I agree, Mr. Walsh, and especially when it comes to elections, we should be finding a common ground. Mr. Chair, I would like to submit for the record, though, two articles, one from Tioga Publishing and one from the Times Leader, just refuting Mr. Morelli's comments. If I could submit for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you all so much for being here. This is such an important topic, and hearing your personal stories and perspectives really helps us get a sense of what it was like there on Election Day, which is so important to us. Mr. Walsh, I'd like to start my questions with you. Having heard your testimony to this point and having read your written statement, in the most general sense, Mr. Walsh, do you feel like there was a free and fair election in your county in 2022?
Absolutely not.
And is it your assessment that voters around your state were treated equally to one another?
No, they weren't.
And in your observation and in what you have learned as you continue to research this issue, do you believe ballots were handled securely in your county?
Nowhere near secure at all.
And having had the opportunity not only to have your own experience, but continue to study this issue and talk to others, how do you and your community feel about what happened on Election Day in 2022?
I talked to a lot of people. I talked to most of these people that signed these affidavits. I didn't talk to every one of them, but I did talk to a lot of them, and they just feel like things are broken in our county. And it was like the last 3 elections, it's been something else, something else, something else. And then this was like the coup de grace, you know what I mean? So we just don't have any trust in what's happening in Luzerne County.
And if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, it sounds like one of the things that's important to you is transparency and accountability. Would that be fair?
That's a fair assessment.
All right. Is there anything besides those two things, which we're actually working very hard to do here in Congress on this subject, is there anything beyond that that we could be doing that would help allay your concerns and develop a better going forward strategy?
I heard a couple of times today that more money needs to be thrown at it, and I just don't agree with that. I think there's a core issue and a core problem, and it may be a handful of individuals. I'm not pointing my finger at any one person. We need to find out what the problem is. A $65,000 salary for Election Bureau, our average single income in Luzerne County is just over $29,000, $54,000 for a couple. So a $65,000 salary for an Election Bureau director is not a bad salary in our town. I don't think throwing money at the problem. I think the management of funds is the issue in Luzerne County.
All right, thank you. Mr. Herring, I'd like to pose a similar question to you. Do you have any observations based on what you have seen and what you have heard today about how we might be taking action to ensure that our future elections operate more effectively?
Well, I know it's an unpopular thing apparently, but accountability, as again, has been stated so much in this room, but even more so, the Luzerne County Board of Elections has in their own rule book that they can conduct an internal investigation into what happened. So when it goes to the accountability piece, I think that's an important part. They could have conducted their own investigation. That's why they're in those positions. They didn't get asked to go into those. They signed up and said, I'll do this. They had to agree to it. So why didn't they conduct their own internal investigation before turning it over to the district attorney? And I think it goes back to accountability. Either they didn't understand their own rule book or they didn't want to follow it. But that's one of the big issues that needs to be looked into as well. Because now they hide behind, they shield themselves under this current investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. And Mr. Fitzgerald, to you, is there anything that you would add in terms of what we should be looking at and what we should be attempting to implement or do going forward to ensure we have better elections in the future?
Yes, I think that the county council, they should change the charter where right now it says, as far as who gets on the board, it should be 2 of one party, 2 of another, and you vote the other party. So it's always going to be 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, or 3 Democrats and 2. I think they should change it if no more than 2 of any party. So then this way, no one party can steamroll another party. That's number 1. Number 2, at the Election Bureau, we're all about diversity, except when it comes to the Election Bureau. Diversity in the Election Bureau should be not black, white, what man, female. It should be Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and Communist, whatever. Whatever you're voting, whatever demographics you have in your county could possibly be there. So when you have, you know, like it's like going to a football game and the Giants offense and the Giants defense and the coach of the Giants are flipping the coin toss. Hey, it's heads. How the hell are we supposed to know if it's heads or tails? Are you kidding me? That's what we have that's what we have in our county. So it's a joke. It really is. So again, it goes right back to the hiring. And if we can have transparency and we can work together, and we have, I hate to say it, it's possible, a Democrat and a Republican as director and assistant director, and the Republican go to the Republicans, hey, Republicans, they're not cheating. And the Democrat, or vice versa, could go, they're not cheating. And they work together. That would be a beautiful thing. But we don't have that in Luzerne County. We have a person that's in charge, hires their friends of the same political view, and then the other party gets screwed. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure that one out. So if you want to ask me, I know it's against the law. You're not allowed to hire people based on their political views. But, you know, when people are interviewing for the job, they just go on Facebook, Google, or the voter list and find out how they voted, and they could hire whoever they want, and they could say they didn't know, but they do.
Right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, each for sharing your stories and your perspectives with us here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The Chair of the Election Subcommittee yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And may I say it's great having the former Secretary of State of Florida here asking questions and helping us get to the bottom of this. Gentlemen, and those who testified, just the audios and all we listened to, thank you very much for being here. There's no question. I think everybody listening, and a lot of people are listening, by the way. This is on C-SPAN and other places, or not necessarily C-SPAN, but other streams. Very, very compelling, very, very important. I think will make a difference. Right? It certainly needs to, and certainly won't change November 8th, 2022, but if this isn't being heard, the level of frustration, the level of honesty, the level of accuracy, the level of firsthand information as to what's occurred, and the general sense and feel from each of you. I mean, we got Ross Township, we got Duryea, and Mr. Herring, where are you from?
Actually, I'm from Duryea, Sweet Valley, Mr. Walsh.
You're from Sweet Valley, okay, so part of my district, some in District 8, so great. By the way, Mr. Herring, thank you for your service.
Thank you, I appreciate
honor
that.
you. Thank you. So, look, why this gets in everybody's head so bad, I mean, it's kind of like if fuel wasn't delivered to the Indy 500 on the day of the race. It's like if the Super Bowl, no footballs were brought, right? Did you use that one before, Mr.
Yeah,
Fitzgerald?
we used that analogy earlier today.
No paper for the voting machines, right? So it's just incredulous that could occur. And earlier I asked in the earlier testimony, how did this happen? And they said, well, they didn't order paper. Well, obviously, but what was the system? Who was to order it? Who else was involved? Was it the purchasing? Wasn't there a checklist on what to cover the days previous to the election? And you know what the answer to that is? Of course there is. And that's why no other county, perhaps in the country, let alone Pennsylvania, experienced anywhere near the type of problems that we did in Luzerne County. So we do demand accountability, we do demand some responsibility, and we've got to have a clear picture as to what's being done to correct this problem moving forward, whatever it might be. It could be very simple, but at least the chain of decision-making so this doesn't occur. So, look, I got a lot of questions, but I really, really appreciate everything that you have to say here and why those responsible have not been screaming from the rooftops what comments and procedures of what's going to occur in less than 60 days in our primary election is perhaps worse than the mistakes that were made on election day itself, right? What's been done, their level of silence is highly unacceptable and continues to bleed confidence from my constituents, the people of Luzerne County, people of Pennsylvania, probably people of the country that are listening to this. So we certainly need to get that response from this committee hearing, as well as from the district attorney's report, I hope, which of course is a criminal investigation, but it should be taking the people's well-being into consideration. Go ahead, Mr. Herring, you have something to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just to add real quick, not only did we ask questions at these public meetings, but we also followed our process, which was doing the right to know laws Mr. Fitzgerald talked about. I submitted 3 right to knows. All 3 were denied, so Luzerne County has no interest in giving us what we're asking for, which is available under the law. Not only did they deny, the state ruled on my behalf. I was granted my appeal, and then they actually took it to the Court of Common Pleas. So I have an upcoming court hearing just to get right to know requests through the county. So I just want you to know this is what we're dealing with.
Mr. Fitzgerald, has the county in any way done anything to renew or instill any confidence in you in the upcoming election, for the upcoming election?
No, they're actually doing the opposite. Instead of just coming out, like I said, and just doing everything they can to, get back voter an apology is the thing. Hey, listen, I have kids, and we all, I've done a lot of things that we all have. But the first thing is you have to take ownership of it. You have to apologize, and then you have to reconcile that. And they haven't even apologized.
Right.
So you can't reconcile something until you at least admit you did something wrong. Look in the mirror, say, I messed up. How do we fix it?
Mr. Walsh, last word. Any further comments to instill confidence in you or your thoughts?
I just think we have to figure out the root of the problem. You can't fix this going forward. It is unfixable right now until we know what happened in November. That's it. I mean, I don't know why this is so difficult. And just to Mr. Herring's comment about this right to know, why the county would put us through hoops if they had nothing to hide. Why do they take him to court over a right to know access that he's requesting from the county?
Yeah, I too would like to know what they're afraid of even participating in today's hearing, so I agree with you. Thank you all again very, very much.
The gentleman yields. First of all, let me thank our witnesses for appearing before us today, and just remind members of the committee that if you have additional questions, which they may have for you, we ask that you please respond to those questions in writing. At this point, I recognize Ranking Member Morelli for closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and for being here. As I mentioned in my opening statement, and there's been discussed throughout this hearing, the paper shortages and other issues on Election Day in Luzerne County in 2022 were inexcusable. Many of the factual questions, however, about what led to the Election Day issues remain unanswered after nearly 2.5 hours of our hearing. That's not surprising. The witnesses most able to provide relevant testimony rightfully declined to testify due to the ongoing district attorney's investigation. And much has been said by witnesses and by members about the fact that this is in the district attorney's office. I want to just submit to the record three sections of Pennsylvania Title 25 statute. The first, Section 2642I, which requires the Board of Elections to report to investigate election frauds, irregularities, and violations of this act, and to report all suspicious circumstances to the district attorney. Section 355B of Title 25, the code delegates the district attorney of any county in which a violation has occurred shall have concurrent powers and responsibilities with the Attorney General over violations committed under this act. And finally, under the same title, Section 1802, each commission shall investigate alleged violations of this part within its county and report apparent violations to the district attorney of the county. So the Pennsylvania statute clearly determined in state law that the first obligation is to report irregularities to the district attorney. That's what should happen. That is what's happening. I support that happening, and I do think also that once the report of the district attorney is made available, and my understanding is there's no reason to suggest that the district attorney won't do anything other than his obligation. I understand he's a qualified individual. I might note parenthetically he's a Republican, so I think he'll do the right thing. I'm sure of that. I'm sure my colleagues would agree. And then I think that when we get that report, then many of the questions that have been asked today will understandably be answered. If not, then there's additional opportunities for us to investigate. Also, we just want to note, none of the testimony today provided that I heard supports the conclusory title of this hearing as an example of government suppression in the title of the hearing, government suppression. And I do note the FBI website, intentionally deceiving qualified voters to prevent them from voting is voter suppression. Intentionally deceiving qualified voters to prevent them from voting is voter suppression, and it is a federal crime in addition to potentially state crimes because there were both federal elections and state elections on the ballot in 2022. All this leads me simply to say this. This is tragic. What happened to all voters in Luzerne County is tragic. So let's do the right thing. Let's get the report from the district attorney, who is empowered by Pennsylvania law to do the initial investigation on any irregularities. Once that report comes back, if we determine that there are further things this committee ought to do, I would strongly suggest, Mr. Chair, and I will support a second hearing to take note of whatever the report is and to ask for additional testimony based on that report and to continue to look at what responsibilities the Election Bureau had, who was responsible for this. This is catastrophic. It should not be done, and so I would continue to support efforts to get to the bottom of what happened. And I appreciate very much you allowing me the opportunity to offer some additional comments. I would submit these sections of Pennsylvania Code with unanimous consent for the record. And with that, I yield back, sir.
Without objection. Sorry, without objection. Thank you for being here. I agree with Mr. Morelli that we have more unanswered questions at this point. That's why I think it is important for us to continue down this path. I also think that it was important for us to have this hearing now, even though we did not have people that should have been here that could have answered some of these questions, because this is so important. It's going to take multiple hearings. It's going to take a lot of investigation for us to get to the bottom of this, get the proper answers, and ensure that this never happens again. So I think it was timely to have this hearing. I think it was important to have this hearing, and I think it's important that we continue the oversight and investigations that we're empowered to do. I also want to bring up that according to Britannica, voter suppression is also defined as, in U.S. history and politics, any legal or extra-legal measure or strategy whose purpose or practical effect is to reduce voting or registering to vote by members of a targeted group or political party or religious community. So I think, as I had stated in my questioning earlier, these actions very well could equate to voter suppression simply by losing the faith and confidence of the American people in their electoral system. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative. Okay. We're going to pause for just a moment, as I have been advised that the full chair of the committee is returning and would like to actually close out the committee hearing. So without objection, we'll just pause for a moment. And members are advised that votes will be called in approximately 5 minutes. Votes in the full House. I was told he should be here in about 1 minute.
Definitely.
Welcome to it.
It's a green at the top.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Loudermilk. Mr. Ranking Member, sorry for being tardy on my return back. I just wanted to come and say thank you for participating in today's hearing. I think throughout the hearing today, we heard about the challenges that Luzerne County had, about how voters like yourselves, like others that we played testimony of here today, how they were disenfranchised by actors in Luzerne County. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, everyone deserves answers as to what occurred. Many people were heard here today, but I think at the end of the day, we deserve, and you deserve, and the people of Luzerne County deserve answers as to what happens. And so I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate every member of the committee for participating, Mr. Muser and the ranking member as well. And without objection, each member shall have 5 legislative days to insert additional material into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there's no further business, I thank the members for their participation. And without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Sorry to make you sit down.
No, we're good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Go get her to leave this folder. Go ahead.